Off announcements? Or
Great, thank you. I can, the mic is definitely on, I can hear myself.
Oh, that is lost.
We'll follow the usual pattern of the announcements are in the agenda, both here in front of you, bless you, and posted. So I won't go into the announcements, but I will do a few district highlights. And I was just comparing with Sabine and Gus to see who would get what. So I know a few this time, so I'll let them, when they get to their section, take a few of these. But so let me do the good news highlights first, some of which was in my community letters, so I won't belabor it, but I do want to raise up the 5th and 6th grade, what I called musical prowess of 7 days, starting with a wonderful musical performance of Little Mermaid Jr., carrying all the way through to the 5th and 6th grade performances, one live, in presence, and very, very high quality. And every single performance in the 5th and 6th grade concert deserve mention, and I think no one disagreed with me for featuring certainly a phenomenal alto saxophonist joined by guitarists that really are just an unbelievable level. But that is sort of where it seems everyone in Hastings is. So it was really wonderful, and the spirit in the room, some of you were there, was tremendous. So it's wonderful to see the reputation of Hastings for its music and art and performance, to see it live and in person and matched by the spirit of the audience. Saturday evening, I did not go, but it was Playwrights Festival. Rachel Weinberg is back with her program, and are you going to do Playwrights Festival?
We can talk about it, but...
Well, okay, so you can fill in, but I have a nice statement here that Rachel sent me, which I'm going to largely read because it deserves it. So it was one of the most exciting and creative projects I've done in Hastings, she wrote. The mission for those who chose to accept it was to write and perform a play in 28 hours. So they had 4 plays and 1 musical with over 20 students, including tech, who pulled off this challenge. So Friday at 3:15, and I did get that email, but Friday at 3:15, students received the prompt. They then wrote through the night and had first drafts ready by Saturday at 11 a.m. Would that be an all-nighter? So the rest of Saturday was spent rewriting, blocking, setting light cues, sound cues, costumes, props, making programs, cleaning the auditorium, and getting ready for the audience to arrive at 7 o'clock. And according to Rachel and others I've heard from, the creativity of the students was breathtaking, and how they pulled it together, and that years of learning was phenomenal. Quite importantly, Rachel went on to say the following: language arts skills. She wanted to make a point of that sort of learning that was going on, in addition to just the persistence and energy required to go from 7 p.m. to 11 a.m. with a product theatrically. But it was developing a solid understanding of plot structure, rising action, conflict resolution, a great command of dialogue, activated and focused text, able to have sophisticated discussions on rewriting, including character creates plot, tone versus voice, and how to use both, and to successfully rewrite a play to achieve the correct balance between realism and absurdism to make comedy. So, I mean, I'd like to talk about intellectual rigor, and that truly is that. So, congratulations. Science research program, I know Gus and Sabine, you're going to speak to that, so I'll let you do that. Briefer set of updates, but I think certainly speaking to the wonderful strengths of Hastings. A bit on COVID-19, which is the manual has been substantially updated and now posted. It's a lot shorter, which I think is actually good news, that the procedures and regulations are less now, so that it was quite a substantial rewrite, but that has been posted. We do continue to send out our daily counts, and I think that's important. I've heard that from families. The ones that went out today showed that we're still at 1 or 2 a day, roughly 3 over since last Friday. And at 2 Friday notes ago, I managed not to talk about COVID last week, I think, which I enjoyed not doing. 2 Fridays ago is more assuring families that we are still very much vigorous in paying attention as it relates to COVID-19. I think right now, and Sabine and Gus could probably speak to this, a very small percent of individuals are wearing masks. Mine is always around my neck, ready to go on it if need be. But I think we're paying very close attention in a lot of ways. And again, we're fabulously lucky to have such a wonderful nursing team, so we're providing tests to families who want those, who are at all nervous or worried. One of the change in regulations is that home testing is now accepted. so that's a key point of flexibility. So there's a number of things that the manual now tries to pick up. Lastly, you as a board heard from me Friday that this incredible advocacy from the superintendents, I wish I could take credit, I'm just in the room with them, that they really keep pushing on how our management of COVID-19, how can we really strike a balance between guaranteeing, well, you can't guarantee, but assuring health, promoting health, and also making sure we truly are open, free schooling settings. So they are advocating into both commissioners of health and education, Commissioner Rosa, for please give us metrics and give us very local metrics, because we may see upticks in COVID-19. We're seeing that internationally again, and so if that happens, can we be very focused and specific on what would lead us to a set of decisions in terms of more restrictions. Lastly, very important, Friday we'll update families on what the visitation policies will be. I'm pretty sure when I meet with the principals Thursday, and Melissa and Maureen, that we will, if you will, open it back up. One thing I do want to say, and I think most will agree with me, is that we will open it back up with an eye on security. That it's still not just walk through the buildings, it's not come in when you want and go out when you want, because for any of us who have children, we don't want schools that way, and sadly we can't. So the sense is that by appointment, you come to the door, you sign in. If by chance you have to be here without appointment, you come to the door and you check in, and you're guided to where you need to be in the building and guided back. And that's how most schools and districts operate, and I think Hastings has been that way. And it's important that, yes, we have the access and parents and families will be in the buildings, but in a very guided, secure way. And a number of us feel it that way, and Alteris, amongst others, our security consultants are really insisting on it. So I'm pleased that later in the week I hope I can announce it, and hopefully families will understand that it's never was and it really shouldn't be wide open doors into our schools, but certainly access provided. So that's my COVID update for this time.
I think that covers district highlights as well. Okay, we'll move on to Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum.
Okay, so on March 16th, we had Superintendent's Conference Day, and members of the faculty engaged in a series of learning workshops, and those were designed by our Hastings Professional Learning Committee, and that group is comprised of members from all bargaining units. The purpose of the day was twofold. The first was to explore barriers and enabling forces for ensuring a welcoming and affirming environment for all, through a series of learning opportunities with experts in the field, and also to plan for the shift from theoretical understanding to practical application with job-alike colleagues. So basically there was learning that happened, then there was time to process and think about direct application and how that would look in their various roles. So Dr. Sean Joseph kicked off the day with a call to action around culturally responsive practice in a session titled Persisting Through Difficult Times, the Leadership Lessons of Joseph. And then this keynote address was followed with a choice of workshop. One was the social neuroscience of race and ethnicity, facilitated by Dr. Dan McCluskey. The other was You Can't Be What You Can't See, how media shapes our understanding of gender, and what we need to envision a more inclusive world, facilitated by Dr. Sharon Maxwell and Chelsea Maxwell. I'd like to thank the PTSA for grants for those. You know, that was not something that came out of district funding. That was something that came through the grants, and we're very grateful for those. And we're also grateful to Dr. Janice Mateo Toledo, our Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator, and Kristen Kumar, our Inclusion Facilitator. They worked together to collaboratively design and facilitate a learning session on culturally responsive pedagogies, inclusive mindset, and universal design for learning. And as I mentioned earlier, time for reflection and collaborative instructional planning was also incorporated into the day. The Professional Learning Committee has been very busy, so in addition to that, they've also been spending time reviewing guidance on curriculum implementation timelines from New York State Ed for each of the content areas that's been identified in the design of the curriculum review cycle, which we're still actively working on. And following this review, the committee began to revise the placement of content in the review cycle template, thinking about where we're doing more of an inquiry, where we're doing more of an implementation, and so that is currently in process. And feedback on the final draft document is going to be sought by members of the committee, pushing it out one last time for anyone who wasn't physically present for that. And then following that feedback process, the document will move through to the department chairpersons and then to the departments for review and input before circling back here. And then finally, the technology plan, which was presented to you recently, has now been submitted into the New York State Education Department portal. And the plan is now going through a committee review process at the state level, and then following that process, we'll be informed about next steps.
A lot of great stuff going on. Thank you, Dr. Szymanski. Okay, and Maureen?
Yes,
Some
so,
pretty pictures.
yeah, I'm just going to share some updated pictures, again, with the construction, and these were taken last week, and even since then, there's been a lot of other work accomplished in that space. So the top photo there, this is the Hillside Edition, and you can see now the finished cafeteria ceiling, and it's quite beautiful, the lighting is spectacular, and they continued, and the flooring actually is completely done in the area, and they are, I believe, almost finished with the hallway flooring for the addition. Again, here's some classroom flooring, two pictures. It looks beautiful. Actually, the construction manager showed me some updated photos today of what is now in the hallways, and it really looks terrific. I know the one on the right is flipped. I know, I'm sorry. Again, this is on the left too, the mechanical system startup. I know it shifted. I think what happened was I had it in PowerPoint, and when I sent it to, I uploaded it to Google, and it shifted the pictures, to be honest with you. That is what happened. Again, another big milestone always is to get all the systems up and running. It requires many different trades to be involved, as well as Con Edison, and this is something that's an extremely important part of the process, to make sure all the mechanical in the system are up, running, balanced, and pass all the inspections. So we now, everything was working well, everything is fully integrated, and there's different inspections that also go on prior to them being completely signed off. Again, the outside facade on the right, that is close to completion at this point. So again, it was a very interesting kind of design there. Now switching to this building, middle school auditorium, again, I think some of these you saw the last time. This just kind of shows you some up close pictures of the steps. The steps and the stage were also redone, and storage that was built underneath it. And then on the right, you can see the strip sand, the existing floor, and it was also repaired. And then here on the right, and honestly, it looks great, but in person, it looks better.
That's the original flooring.
That's the original flooring, and it was replaced, and being, if you, part of the design was to kind of have the lighter floors in the room to really create a much more open, airy space. And, as we all know, like sometimes dark floors are in. And
that's original to when, Maureen?
Original to, I want to say, I have to go back.
Roughly.
Probably in the 20s or so.
Wow, the 20s.
Yeah, 30s, this part of the building, so.
They're probably better than they're built today.
Oh,
Yeah,
for sure.
it's really beautiful, and I don't know if anyone saw the commercial
Exactly.
outside. The seats for the auditorium were delivered today, and they've been bringing them in pallets and things. So again, this room really has moved along beautifully, and again, the good news is everything as of today, it seems to be on schedule. And again, some of those things at Hillside, the construction's one piece, but just making sure the systems are up and running, of course, was an important milestone that they were able to accomplish. So that's the little bit of update, and we're hoping that in the next month or so, when substantial completion is done prior to the ribbon cutting, we'll, maybe one night before a board meeting, we'll do a walkthrough with the board.
Nice.
So you can kind of see it.
Just a quick question, Maureen. The red outside of the building, how does that weather?
It's actually, it weathers, it's an interesting type of material
You
because.
should go back to it because it's fascinating.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, what is that? Use this, I'm always doing it back on my computer or something. So if you're up and close and personal to it, it actually has, right, Bill, the installation is kind of right behind it. And it is, yeah, go ahead.
You want me?
Yeah, sure, you go.
So
That's
there's
no
little
laser
He's been up there, we were fascinated by it.
space,
The poor man's
space
laser
between
pointer.
those.
Yes.
And the installation is right behind, not covered, but designed to deal with any element.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, did they leave something off?
No.
But no, and it
Right.
adds to the whole look.
And we could definitely, I mean, I think when we do the walkthrough, of course, the designers will be there, and the, construction manager who can provide a better, explanation, but a lot of the material that was used is like kind of newer technology, and,
I just don't want to realize in 6 years that we've got it didn't age well, and
No,
we're trying to
I mean, honestly, every.
Julie,
Well-
no, anyway, Doug.
But if there's a way to, before it's signed, it gets signed.
You want a Cornell story?
How would I have it at
Yours,
Cornell?
Hall?
Yours, yeah.
Well, at Cornell, they built a steel building designed to have it change color in the elements, and it never changed color for a long time. Because, so you got this, it was supposed to be a reddish steel, and it stayed an ugly steel for years and years, because they didn't judge, this is a true story, I'm dating myself.
I'm trying to remember, I went to Cornell.
I know.
I remember color.
By the time you were there, it changed color.
Right, I mean, I don't remember it being that color.
Yeah.
Oh, funny. That's
Yes.
great.
So now they're at a point that the site work is, which is the restoration of the outside, is commencing, and they'll be kind of working from the back of the building and restoring, of course, the construction area, putting the seed down. We're still trying to design our gardens and kind of like the landscaping around the area, and the fire lane, constructed. At the next meeting, I also want to show a proposal, something else we're looking at, as in like flood mitigation kind of strategy that we've been working with the village on, which is related to this project but won't be part of the bond scope. So I'll update you when I have a better, we're kind of fleshing out some designs there and what would be feasible at the site, so. But the reason it's timely and related to this project is we would do that work before we finish everything there too. So if we didn't restore all the areas and we were to do something else there, we would get a credit on the construction that we may want to apply to doing something different there, so. But that'll come once we kind of get out of the building fully.
I was just thinking it could be a cool idea, is once, maybe it's next fall, we could have a walking tour where maybe Ray could come on it, or someone else, and anyone in the community, and a nice fall day could start up at Hillside, walk down, come check out the audit, just to do kind of a community-based, could be a cool idea.
We could do that before, I don't get to it.
Well,
Could do it in the spring if it's
Yeah.
ready.
As a newcomer to all of this, but someone who's been around the education world a lot, witnessed my Cornell comment. I mean, it's such a hats off to the stewardship of the leadership of this village and the voters in the village, and I know it wasn't easy, because nowhere is it easy to invest in capital. But it's a great idea, because it's gigantic advancement at Hillside and then in this building, for just down the hall here and then upstairs, and it has to be celebrated.
Yeah,
It's just so smart, so thoughtful, so long-term thinking.
yeah. That's off to
We're
everyone.
fortunate because, again, we can kind of go back over, what we put in and, what the end result is. I know we've been updating throughout the point, but even, as Bill said, the investments beyond the restoration and the improvements, we also did do a lot of big facilities, upgrades, like our boiler, things that were like 30 years old, this building, and restoration, the whole facade of this building, which was a tremendously tricky upgrade and restoration of an old building, a historical old building that needed to be done with such care. And as we know, the parapets on the top of this building were crumbling, and we were, so in addition to that, we've also done a lot of the really, really extremely important maintenance work on both the buildings, so.
Just that boiler, it's an amazing thing to see how it was
I did.
constructed.
I think people, I'm sorry, maybe, I don't know if we could bring down the boiler, room, but
Right.
it is pretty fascinating when you're down there.
You can make a video.
I'm sure there's a very
Students can make
small
a video.
subset of people who would love to go down and check on the boiler room.
Totally. I'd like to do that.
Very cool. Okay, that's great, thank you. I know more to come on the budget from you, Maureen. Okay, student reports, Sabine and Gus.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Spring sports started last week, and the first games start next week. The badminton tournament is this weekend, and any high school student or teacher is welcome to sign up. That event is run by the SU. And a little update on the college process. Seniors should receive their final admissions decisions this week and next week. This year has definitely been challenging in terms of college applications. While many seniors have been accepted into their first choice colleges, a large portion are receiving more waitlists and rejections than expected. Some theorize that this competitive admission cycle could be due to increasing number of applications and increasing number of students applying test optional. Others speculate that the low acceptance rates could be compensating for large numbers of enrollment for selective colleges in last year's admission cycle. And another theory is that with an increase in students taking gap years in the past year and deferring their admission to their chosen school, colleges are left with less available spots for the class of 2026. So it is clear that the pandemic has drastically changed the college admissions process, but either way, good luck to all the seniors out there who are waiting to hear back from their final schools. Last comment from me is that the seniors got the couches back in the lobby, which is a very big win for us. So a huge thanks to Mr. A and the custodial staff who made that possible.
That's very nice.
Yeah.
Were they gone because of COVID, Sabine?
Yeah, it was like they didn't want everyone to be so close
Right. Got it.
And for all of us juniors, we're super excited for our senior friends who are about to get into college. But I know at least for me, I kind of want it to stay farther away because as soon as they get in and as soon as that admission cycle is done, we're next up. So you can kind of feel that stress with the juniors. There's a lot of visits. There's a lot of online information sessions, spring break, going to see schools. So that kind of hype is starting to happen for the whole college process. But it's exciting. It's scary. But that's definitely something that's happening. The Playwrights Festival, which Dr. McCursey talked about, and I'm not sure I can do much more detail than he did, but it was awesome. People managed to write like full short plays in 24 hours, which is insane, and they managed to be funny, and like it's hard to be funny at all, and they did it in 24 hours. So that was really, really cool that they managed to do that. They worked so hard. I know a couple people that did it. It sounds like it was just an amazing experience. WestF2, which is the Westchester Science and Engineering Fair, which leads up to the International Science Fair, which is like the huge one with the $200,000 grand prize, just happened, and all of our seniors in the science research program competed. I think they had a really good time. They all said the judges were super experienced in their respective fields, and they were just excited to present and share all the amazing work that they've done. I think we're still waiting to hear back on decisions, but we're all super proud of them and the work that they've done for the past 2 years. As far as juniors in that class, to keep on the theme of senior-junior, the mentor boards are starting to fill up. Ms. Shandroff is placing juniors with different scientists and starting out those summer internships and research opportunities. We've got some really interesting projects that you guys will all get to see next year, I'm sure. It's sort of spanning the gamut from waste management and ornithology and neuroscience to behavioral economics and allergy studies. There's some really cool stuff coming up. And the last thing I have, I wasn't sure whether to do this during the student report or during the public comment because it's a little bit more of me and a couple of students. But since Project Share reaches so many different people at the school, I thought it would be a good thing to include it in this student report. So we had a board meeting for Share last night, and we're starting to plan the coming year. We're doing a big fundraiser in June. But Jeannie Newman, who's the director of Share, she taught Hastings forever. And the rest of us are really hoping that the shared dinner can be put on the calendar for the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, which is the 22nd of November. Because that's been on the calendar forever. Obviously, because of COVID, it couldn't be. It's tough to have a big event like that when you're scared about just having 20 kids in a classroom. But we're hoping that that can tentatively be put on the calendar so that we can really be serious about trying to make that happen in obviously a super safe, manageable way. But, yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
That is a good one.
Thanks, guys. A lot of good, positive momentum. Couches. it's,
You gotta do a third.
Doesn't
Couches,
get better than colleges.
All the classes erupted this year.
Couches, colleges, and
couches, college.
People
need
have
a
to
third.
faint on the couch when they find out where they got into school, so they need those
Way too
couches.
keep it positive, guys. Sounds beautiful.
Okay, thank you. So, I think I just lost my place in the agenda here.
Public comment.
I think we're,
Public
I think we're done.
comment?
No, we are
Public
not.
is here?
It's a
Okay.
lot.
School calendar.
So posted for the board is the revised recommended calendar. I'm hoping and assuming by now the board's had a chance to study it, absorb it. Did do a brief cover memo. I think the process here has been good. A very efficient committee had worked internally to come up with one set of recommendations. I think the discussion the board had 2 weeks ago about needed modifications, I think was very healthy, a true listening to both your own interests and those of those who you represent. And we came, I think, quite quickly to a resolution, which is before you. We do know that the shifting dates around Labor Day may get on our side later. I don't think we want to always front-load all 3 superintendent conference days, but I think for next year that's fine and healthy. And there was, I think, and Liz can speak, very quick agreement we could do that. We understand the different points of view regarding the modification at spring break, but we do that with all due respect and great respect for people and how they approach their lives of faith. So I think we would think as an administrative team, and that also includes administrative assistants and teacher reps. So all of your professionals in the district do endorse what we're bringing to you.
Yeah, right.
I just wanted to say, like, thank you so much for you and the committee for considering, what we as the board asked and what the community asked. I think that's very helpful and respectful, and certainly really appreciate it. And I agree with you. I'd love to hear from you and Melissa, next year, how front-loading those 3 superintendent's days goes. And if you feel that it's too much and you're not getting out of it what you want, I think that you should bring it back to the board and say, you know what, having it in the middle of the year is actually really helpful. It breaks up the time for the teachers, and I for one, would be open to, next year if you really feel that that's not efficient. But thank you so much for being willing to try it this year.
I would also add that thank you for the engagement that went on with putting this together and listening to the community as well, in terms of the fact that just Labor Day was not really working for almost everybody. I would also say that I would also add that we should not sort of put on the back bench without being more active about the next process. If it should erupt again, we all agree that taking this holiday away doesn't mean that that's the standing order. Community members who I know are actually listening, because some of them had reached out to me, had to do with the fact that that is because they listen to the engagement, and Easter Sunday will always be a Sunday. It's not something that is even part of the school calendar, never ever. So it doesn't hold any weight if you are trying to decide on which days to take out. So I just wanted to make sure that they know we heard, but in the future, like Doug said, it's been muddy, it's been something that we are all trying to figure out, and I'm hoping that we would take that due diligence in the future. But thank you, and I'm in agreement with the calendar. If we are going to vote, I need to excuse myself for a second.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I thought it was really impressive, the leadership team. I know you worked in a lot of committee meetings, but the turnaround was flawless, and it's due to leadership, the stakeholders that you had in it. But this calendar seems to hit a lot of home runs. So thank you for making that change.
I think 2 people in particular Fee and Nancy were instrumental in setting the stage for us.
Excellent.
In terms of what was here. And a committee reviewed what they recommended, but I'm told it was an extra efficient process because Nancy and Fee really put their minds together to bring you what you have. And then the adjustments.
Great, okay.
I had one question. I'm just looking specifically at the calendar. So the November 3rd it's boxed on it's evening parent-teacher conferences, which means there's school that day, right? Okay. I get a little confused with the
Yep.
boxing means that there's no school. And so then,
Right, a white box doesn't show up at all.
yeah, I guess it's school closed on days boxed in green. I guess that's the key. Okay.
That's also going to be a snow day from my weather reporting.
Do I have a motion to approve the school calendar for 22-23?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Good work. Thanks, everyone, for what we worked on that. Okay, budget presentation.
Do you want to start?
I'll start it. So we're going to stay in our seats this time. We enjoyed standing up last time, but this is briefer to really give you the background you need to have some discussions as a board. So there are two parts to this brief presentation. The first part is in a very direct, clear way saying of the $3.5 million in growth, how does that break out across the major driver areas, both in dollar total and percent? And you'll see that there's some number that brings you, a small number brings you 75% of that growth, and then a balance around the 25%, and Maureen will provide you that detail. Then after that, we'll turn to what are not current recommendations, but providing you areas from largest to smallest where you might think about adjustments in a multi-year way. So again, you're politely allowing me to say these are not recommendations currently, but brought to you, for your consideration in what I would, again, as you had asked as a board, in a multi-year look. So Marina.
Yeah, so again, we're just going to start again reminding the board and anyone who's watching where our current budget proposal in terms of the dollar increase is proposed for next year, and it is currently at $3.5 million, which does represent a 6.64% increase in budget to budget. As Bill had mentioned, we know that 75% of that increase is linked to these three items, and starting with the largest driver, which again is always our largest driver, no different this year than previous years. But typically, we're seeing somewhere in the range of $800,000 to $1 million. This upcoming year, we're projecting that at approximately $900,000 worth of what we call salary costs / contractual increases. That also includes the increases in areas of the budget such as health insurance and things like that, the total year-over-year budgeted increase there. So number one driver, as it is every other year, about a little under $1 million this upcoming year we're projecting. The next large item, which is a brand new expense item coming onto the books for the 22-23 school year, is the first installment of a 15-year debt that we did issue to pay for the capital improvements that we've been, kind of looking at each week. And again, the first year of that, we are seeing that large kind of dollar amount coming onto the budget, and that represents about 25% again of our total growth. And again, then there will be a year-over-year, but we won't see those type of increases as the debt continues to be paid over the course of time. So again, that's about $870,000. Again, another area which we did see a larger than our normal growth this upcoming year that we're projecting is in our special education budget. And as we have reviewed with the board, the majority of that increase is really being driven by our out-of-district costs and some contractual services that we broke down. Again, this particular year is a much larger increase than historically we have, and we're going to be looking at that. But occasionally with special ed, being that it is sensitive to one or two students, we do occasionally see some of these larger shifts. And I think coming out of COVID, we believe that, and spoke to some of my colleagues, this seems to be, in other districts, they're seeing also the special ed increases going into next year at a higher rate than typical. And then these are, again, are just kind of some summary. Again, obviously, there's some ins and outs in all of these budget numbers, but just trying at a high level, hit some of those increases. So the remainder of our 25% of that $3.5 million increase is being driven by, these are some of the higher ticket items there. We are anticipating an increase. It's not really an increase, but our actual busing cost this year was higher than we had anticipated, and again, it's related to those special education out-of-district students, and again, we are projecting that to increase by approximately $200,000 next year. Again, there was an increase in the teachers' retirement system that, again, with that rate is given to us by the state, and it is based upon the salaries. It's an amount we pay, a percentage of total salaries of teachers. And that alone is about a $200,000 increase for this upcoming school year. Then, as we all know, and this is kind of capturing a lot of different contractual services, but with the increase of inflation, we are seeing an increase across the board of all of our different contractual services. And if you look at various line items, that also includes supplies as well, though, so we are seeing upticks in even cleaning supplies, and just across the board, we're seeing much higher cost in purchasing goods and services, so that is approximately $200,000 increase. We do have some items that, for this upcoming school year, that would be new expenses. This is an additional to what we would normally have budgeted. So as we discussed, we're hoping to issue, we're engaged with the strategic planning process, as well as we are in need of architectural services to both update our 5-year plan, as well as to just help us with some long-term space facilities issues that we want to address at this building. And also there is an increase in some professional learning. And again, those three are kind of big bucket items, and that's about $150,000 of the increase next year. Again, not unlike everybody at home, we're all seeing, it started actually this current fiscal year, there was a large increase, specifically in electric and actually gas as well. So Con Edison rates in the region have spiked, as well as even our NIPA, which is our electric provider, we're seeing a large, double-digit increases, and they actually kicked in this year. So we're hoping they start to level out, but we are planning for that increase to continue next year at some level. And then another area which we broke out our budget, that there's an increase for 2 things in technology specifically over our current spending. We do have some softwares, and Melissa had spoken about how these are not necessarily new, but these are things that we introduced this year, and we're recommending they be continued, as well as just some infrastructure needs around replacements on our Wi-Fi system. So because of those 2 items, we are seeing about a $70,000 increase in our technology spending for next year. So again, this just pretty much, we try to hit at a high level what we call the major cost drivers that are included in that 3.5. Some of them, as I've described, are going to be not, although some may be recurring, we're not going to see those year-over-year budget increases. I mean, we know that the debt, once it's in, won't be a complete, just kind of carry forward, but, this year, we did have some larger increases in a number of areas that are attributing to that a bit higher growth this year than our typical. Oh, sorry, did I hit the wrong button?
No, it's not you, it's the,
There, it
okay.
was me, no, it was me.
Oh, okay. I saw the computer.
So now we'll just kind of share with you some ideas. So we will also ask, and again, very clearly we have the word "not" highlighted there. As we talk about sustainability, long-term budget growth, I mean, we really tried to just capture some items which would not only be that are part of our cost structure, but by changing some ideas around class size or different things, these would be long-term savings that would not only be a one-off. So sometimes we look at something and say, oh, we spent 50,000, but typically those are non-recurring expenses. In order to really slow your budget growth, you have to look at long-term programmatic, either that or class size items that would really, by changing those, would get you those long-term recurring savings. And just for, many of these things we've actually spoken about in the past, and we did want to include some ideas. Again, there could be more, but these are things that are relatively straightforward. I can walk through each item to kind of, if you need a little bit further explanation of how those numbers are generated.
Maureen, when you
Yes.
say run K to 5 ICT classes at 12 per section, what is it at now?
Okay, so legally, you're allowed to have 12 students with IEPs in an ICT class. Currently, we run 2 sections of ICT at every level, K-5. If we have, now, that is a best practice, but we are legally allowed to run them with 12 students. Most of our ICT classes have anywhere between 4 to 7 children with an IEP. So right now, if we were just look at what we currently are doing, we would be able to collapse an ICT section at every level K through 5, because currently we're running 2. Now, that's not unusual, I'm just, again, saying if we were to say we're, interested in either.
And those are our classes that typically have more than one teacher listed.
So there's 2 teachers and a teacher assistant, so
So the savings comes from the
from
elimination
not
of the
having
role.
those teachers.
Yeah.
We have at least 2 sections in almost every grade that has multiple teachers because of our high-need students. We could push it, we
And
could
again,
collapse
these are
that
only
class.
ordered in dollar amount, I don't want anyone to view that we tried to put them in like higher, the highest dollar amount savings to lower, and again, this is something when we decided, or there was a decision made, I don't know, maybe over 5 or 6 years ago, to kind of go to this model where we did split our ICT classes. At that particular year, we did add about 5 staff members or more, so. And this model is not unusual, but again, if we were looking at ways to kind of really reduce some long-term costs, this could be an area to discuss, whether be looking at what would be, where we would maybe want to reduce some of those. And again, staying on the plan, it's similar to all the other 2 items on the top around class sizes, so.
Maureen,
Yeah.
one quick question.
Sure.
So the class size 6 to 12 is not ICT, but we are looking at 15 students. And then the
That's right.
K to 5 is ICT, and we are looking at 12 students.
But the first one is just first talk about the ICT model and saying if we were to just make that change, what would be the dollar savings each year recurring in the budget? And it would be about $900,000.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the third
Oh, the
one.
third one.
The
So
third-
More electives, think like
Yeah.
a smaller.
So the third one, the class size 6 to 12 is not an ICT class, correct?
Correct, now.
Okay, but we are looking at a
sorry.
15,
Yes.
we are looking at a 15 student kind of
Minimum.
minimum size.
They wouldn't offer a class unless it was for 15
And
kids.
I think Melissa was saying that is a different special.
So for example, if, I'm just giving an example of the high school level, that there's an elective that's run, and sometimes, generating interest, depending on the year, there may be more than 15 students that are interested in that class, and then in some other years, there would maybe only be 11 students interested. So that's basically saying, well, we wouldn't run it because it doesn't have the prerequisite 15 students that enrolled.
So is it just for special classes or just a general class size? That's what I'm trying to differentiate.
It would be the electives,
Just
yes.
electives,
Well, I
okay.
would say it would be all classes
All
outside of
classes?
ICT classes, so anything
That's
that
what-
didn't
that's
have
what I was trying
seating
to
of
ask.
15 students, you wouldn't run it. I mean, that, and again, these are approximate numbers, actually, the number could be much higher than that, but we tried to kind of just look at what we're currently doing, and at a moment in time and say, like, if we were to institute, if that change were in place right now, approximately how much would you save it, and that's about what it
And
would
a
be.
follow-up one.
Sure.
So currently, how much do you agree, like how many students, sorry, do you agree, do you sort of run, what's the estimate? Like, do you run 8 students, or what is the minimum right now, currently?
There is no minimum.
It depends. So for example, when Project Lead the Way went into the high school, and we said, let's get this up and running. We see that there's great value into this, we want to run the engineering, and let's see. there wouldn't necessarily be a massive influx of interest the first year, but once it gets up and running, there could be a lot of interest. So it was more around how do we develop that in terms of our program, and so there wasn't a preset minimum. You know, I'm off the top of my head, it wasn't above 15. I'm doing this off the top of my head.
Got it.
However, we were pretty close, and we said, let's do it, and then it was, you know, there was joy in the class, people saw the value of the class, we run it again.
How many classes total, 6 to 12, are there with less than 15 kids right now? And I say that not
think, yeah, right there,
not
if you-
implying anything by the question, just out of curiosity.
Well, if you have a, I was saying, because don't forget that also would capture, I'm just using, it would be like possibly some of the HAS sections
Yeah.
that are running with 3 and 4 students. So, and those are all subject areas, so you could be, that's 2.0, which would mean that's 5 sections each, that's like 10 sections. At least 10 classes, and that doesn't include the music, which we're gonna speak to separately. That could include some music offerings, but it doesn't capture the private lessons in there, but there are some smaller, like music and art electives too.
If I could mention, Joe, just to, you know, on that topic, we're talking about a number. Again, I understand these are not recommendations, but if we're just talking about a number, you know, it's not arbitrary, it's less arbitrary than it might look, in the sense that something like Project Lead the Way or other electives that have prerequisites, it's not the total student body
That's right.
that qualifies, you know, for that class. So you're drawing from a smaller pool. And then also, you know, when I look at expenses, I really try to think of what's the value being derived. And there are certain classes that are particularly appealing to students in a certain part of their academic career, getting ready for college, looks good on the resume. So, you know, not every class draws from the same size pool.
Yeah, I mean, for example, you're, in high-performing districts such as this, you've got some opportunities at the end of a student's run that you don't want to get rid of, that are going to be smaller, such as your APs. And that's the trade-off. So you may be looking at physics, chemistry, other AP classes where it's an important opportunity at the end of a great run. And if you say we're going to cap it and not have small enrollment, that opportunity is gone. And that's a value proposition. And in other districts like Hastings, the value proposition is you're willing to have those smaller classes for the high school, because then, you know, students in a sense have earned that opportunity.
So looking at AP Physics, Chemistry, Photo, all under 15, but value of making sure that we have those.
Yeah, I was just bringing that up because I know this is just a proposal, but
It's
when
not
you
even a
look,
proposal.
It's not a proposal.
sorry, it's not.
It's not a proposal.
Okay.
It was Andrew's question. Yeah.
Yes, that's important. That is making a totally different mindset right now. So if it's not a proposal, please, by all means, go ahead.
So these are not proposals, but I think, you know, a lot of questions are raised about the sustainability of our budget.
Correct.
And I think we all understand that, but as we look, I know there's times, and we've all done it, you go, and I'm not saying that it's not important to look at the line items, I'm not suggesting that. But reducing copy paper, getting rid of copiers, or reducing a few Schedule Bs are not gonna get you long-term sustainable growth, they just will not. Where your costs are really bad, or in the staffing. I mean, that's all schools, that's not unique to Hastings, we talk about it all the time, over 80% of our budget is staffing. And most of it is teaching, you know, teachers and, you know, direct student support. And as you can see, and we just try to bucket them, looking at what is a big kind of area where you save money around class sizes, and it's class sizes for K-6 and at the high school level or the middle school, high school level, this is kind of how you do it. Because if you say, well, we'll cut this point too, then you need to, you know, be able to reduce full FTEs, you know, cutting like one class here and there. And that's why there are schools that maybe do, I mean, much bigger schools, but they may say, well, it doesn't, we don't care what it is, we're not running it unless that X amount of students.
I was saying, what I was about to say, I was saying that because I was even actually thinking of when you and Dr. Marchesi had the proposal on the special ed, right? And I even said I feel like I'm shooting my own foot. But there is, like, we are just talking about numbers here, but like Melissa clearly said, yeah, or Dr. Bill just said, like physics, chemistry, biology, you know, it's that kind of quote unquote value that necessitates it to be even small if need be. The same thing with ICT classes where it's special ed. You know, you can't assume that 12 is a small number. It isn't, because there is individualized learning processes that is going on in there. We had parents that came here that were in tears trying to move because one child just sitting here in itself is a total issue. And so there's all these standing table here, corner here that goes on that is not just instructional piece alone. So the dynamics is very different. But again, I know that this is not a proposal. Thank you for clarifying that. This is just the driving cost that you're sharing.
And I think it's good, I mean, the example that you brought up, it's an interesting multi-layered consideration. So for example, with ICT classes on a grade, right? You want to make sure that we're creating heterogeneous classes with students with different areas of strength and different areas of needs, and you take the total number of students in a class and you look holistically about that. You take a look at student-to-student pairings, and if a cohort's moving together over time, might some different pairings be ideal to be able to, you know, put certain students together, separate certain students together, making sure that, you know, there's just so many considerations around that. So yes, I mean, that is clearly a cost savings options. However, the question becomes, what are the trade-offs and the pros and cons, and how does that impact the student experience?
Well, I mean, and like we've said, I mean, the reason these are not in our budget proposal, because there was a reason they were added to the budget at one time, but I think it does really come down to, I mean, when you look at ways to get long-term systemic growth, it really does require reductions in staff. I mean, that's the only place you're gonna get to where some cut-in, to a certain degree. I mean, yes, you could talk about some other areas, but just to, you know, kind of walk you through, then the K-5, as much as there are some class sizes, I was looking at it based on currently where we're projecting our class sizes next year. Even if we went to 26, we have some already that are at 22, that would be at 28, so you couldn't cut another section. So that's why sometimes you'll see that number in some years could be higher or lower, you know. Sometimes people say, oh, you only ran it for 18, but if we took away a section, then you're at 23. So being we're relatively small, like adding one section or taking one away dramatically changes our section numbers at the elementary level. So, you know, just kind of looking at that and saying, you know, if you were going to do it, like, how do you arbitrarily do it unless you start saying, we're going to do it 26? You'd have to kind of set some bar. I think we said it was 22, or 20, you know, so I think just using that as a benchmark is where we try to set up, we're not going to rank it below 26, 27, and that's, next year, we look at, that would require us to have 3 staff members at that level. We talk a lot about busing. Eliminating district, again, not something we're suggesting right now with the traffic, you know, it's bad enough in Hillside. But, you know, not as many of you know, that would require actually a referendum for the town to change. But in district busing, we're not required to have it because nobody lives more, there might be like 3 kids that live more than 2 miles away from Hillside.
But they're all.
I don't even think you do. I don't think you are that far, to be honest. No, there are, because we looked even, I think you're like, it has to be, they do it from like the door to door to the gate, actually, not even into the building. But, you know, districts like Pleasantville, things like that, again, we're not suggesting that.
Sidewalks will allow us
What's
to
the
walk.
next item? What's OOD
Oh, out of
busing?
district busing, reduce out of district busing, expand routes. This is another one that is talked about a lot, and the challenge in this, and looking, and again, this is an approximate amount, looking next year. So unlike in-district busing, because it's not required by the state, we get 0 state aid on transportation aid. Out of district busing, we do get state aid, which is about 50% of the cost. So again, even if we would have to save $500,000 out of district busing
Just to
to
make
get
250, right.
So that's the challenge with out of district busing, because it's required by state law that you transport kids out of district that, you know, or X amount away from even private schools, they do kick in state aid toward that effort, the state. So that's always the challenge that, you know, then you're really making some really large scale changes there. But as we know, there's times in which, like, okay, well, we don't want to do that for the lower kids in Hackley, but we want the upper kids. Well, the bus is already going there now. We're already paying for the bus, whether there's upper or lower kids, that, you know, it's a very, I've done we've looked at it, but again, this is one that it kind of seems like it would be easy to do, but it has a lot of different factors that play into it. And again, there are reasons that sometimes kids do go to private schools, you know, outside of special education, and I think this one, you know, you would have to really blanketly say, anyone who's out of district, outside of special ed, no matter what their age is, we're gonna cut that bus service, and we're gonna give them Beeline buses, and we don't care if they're in fourth grade, or, because in order to get that type of savings, that's what you would really have to be there's too many variables each year to kind of start like deciding what bus is going and what's not, you know, right now, because of COVID, the one good thing about our out-of-district busing, although busing is extremely expensive, it's gotten better because the lack of drivers forced the routes to get a lot tighter. So, but again, this is one that is something we could do, you know, and it would be still a significant savings if we did go in that direction.
Maureen, can I ask you
Sure.
a question?
Yeah.
This week, working with Harold Coles and BOCES, he asked me how we're dealing with there's some mandates coming around electric busing
Yeah.
and buses.
Yep.
I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so in addition to like right now, busing being really hard and really expensive, the governor had signed a mandate into law that in the next few years, any new bus, I think in 2 or 3 years' time, any new bus that is purchased has to be electric. Now, the electric buses, it's just like buying an electric car, are significantly more expensive than buses that run on gas. I mean, I know there's other pieces that's important, but in terms of like, we're gonna start seeing those increases in in-district and out-of-district costs that are gonna be coming unless they become a lot less expensive, but right now they're about, I think they're at least like 40 or 50% more than what a bus costs now to purchase, and bus companies will have to, we cannot, you know, use a bus that in a certain amount of time. So any new bus purchases have to be electric in the next 2 years. And I think in like 6 years, you cannot use a bus that's run on gas.
Oh,
It's not
There
even
should be
allowed.
savings on gas costs though, so that might
There's,
wash out.
well, there could be, but electric, as we know, is also expensive, right? Like we talk about Con Ed, I mean,
Yeah.
energy's expensive. It's gonna be more costly 100%, it'll just be greener. That's what it's gonna be.
So you're saying that not only is the manufacture or purchase of internal
new
combustion
buses have
being
to be
phased out,
done.
the actual use of internal combustion is being phased out in 6 years?
Yes.
Is there help on the infrastructure side of that?
Yeah, there are grants.
Charging stations, et cetera, et cetera?
Not that I know of. Not
Good.
that, I mean, we don't have our own buses, thankfully, but.
Well, I
that'll have
think
to be
that's
done by-
important.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Maureen.
No, I think everyone, we actually were on a call and we said, you know, although we like think it's wonderful, like, we're just really concerned about how all
Yeah,
this
well,
is gonna hurt.
that's why Dr. Coles brought up with me in a check-in call, a lot of the districts he worries about who have their own buses, this is now quite significant, because the infrastructure costs alone
Yeah.
are
But even all the
several
bus
hundred
depots
thousand.
we use, we don't know how they're gonna do it. They're gonna pass the cost on to us. I mean, that's.
So I'm not, and please, don't hear me saying it's the wrong thing. Environmentally, it makes a whole lot of sense. The reality, though, is the front-end costs, and it's not just simply acquiring the bus, it's acquiring a way to
Yeah.
charge the bus.
Con Edison is
And
going up.
that's,
Well, Ardsley, who does provide some of our buses, I mean, all of these things, and when this was first introduced, I mean, actually, when we were on the call, this was one of the major issues because of just trying to understand how it's all gonna work, and as Harold was saying, there's a lot of districts up a way that they have all their own buses, so.
Sure.
The fact that they've also purchased buses that usually want to get a certain amount of time off of, you know, they try to phase it in, but it's still not,
Are they
I mean,
going
it
to-
could change, but.
Are they going to give solar
Express.
plants and all those things? Because they need to be able to I mean, if you're just, like, I know you are working with the solar situation with the village, then that will make sense because we know that we can harness that energy to charge it. But right now, the bills are going high and then there's no solar and then we're
Well, we
going to
don't have
charge
our
the
own buses,
buses.
so whoever, we'll just pay, like,
Oh,
whoever
got
has
it.
to take on that cost.
Will a robot drive the electric bus?
I think that this, Maureen, thank you so much, but the other two slides and this slide were so helpful in understanding,
Yeah.
like, very succinctly where the budget is and where it's going. And I think that, you know, I caution our community to understand, like, you know, you look at these and you think you can take money down, but what ends up happening is you actually lower the value of Hastings. And then why would I want to move to Hastings? And then we have people who don't want to come here, and I think that affects it as well. So there's something to be said for keeping a certain standard that we have here to make this a type of community that people want to come to and spend their tax dollars in this community.
Yeah, I would just add a sort of layer down or more closer. So, we have an ethical obligation to the students, and even something that seems like low-hanging fruit, like out-of-district busing, all those families pay taxes in the district, and students.
We want them to come here and
Well,
pay their taxes
but
in
just
the
the
district.
students have they have a right to the education that gets them, to the place they need to be, and so it's a very, there's no, I don't extend the Argo reference again, but
Yeah,
this is
and
not.
putting music lessons there, someone will say, why music? Why not all these other lessons? Like, what are we placing value to versus the sports? It just becomes very tricky if you don't see everything.
I had a thought, Maureen, looking at what the increase was, and you and I had a conversation the other day about what that tax increase looks like for people. But our community voted a couple of years ago for the bond. So the anticipation was that their taxes were going to go up. Am I correct in that? Like they
Well, supermajority vote.
right, so we knew this would happen, that our taxes would eventually go up because we had to pay the bond. So I think that,
40% of people would, well, I didn't want it.
right, yeah, that's a lot. We're in the 40%, this is what happened, we voted for it, and that's that. So, so it's not surprising that our taxes will go up this year because we voted for the bond a few years ago. So it shouldn't be shocking for people that that's going to happen. We knew that was going to happen because we voted for the bond.
And I do think the one thing, and again, I don't, just don't relate to the bond, 'cause I just want to mention this. I think it is always part of a school budget. There are times which even with the bond, people can argue that maybe there were aspects, I don't know what people are feeling, but you can't argue that $10 or $12 million worth of that bond had to be done, because you just cannot not do your board. You cannot, there was a wall on top of this building that I could almost pick a brick off of with my hand. That was, so there was millions of dollars worth of, there's always a need to have a certain amount of money as part of your operational budget that maintains your facilities. That's all I'm saying. And I know that it is a big, chunk of monies coming on this year. We also, as we had shown when we proposed the budget, we will be getting some state aid, not next year, but the following year, to help pay for that debt on the revenue side of the budget. It's just that it takes some time. You have to close out all your budgets and everything to the state before they start giving you their share. But, I would say that we do want to make sure that, we also don't make it seem like, well, you voted for it, because I do think there's a certain amount of money that will always be required. I was thinking about today, about people back in the day when prior to even my arrival, the work that was done in this building, the bridge, Hillside, they built a huge addition on, they bought the Burke Estate. I'm actually, right now, relative to years ago, with the investments from this community in the 80s were tremendous. And not that I just think there's different times, and I was thinking, wow, it was such great thinking that these people at the time buying the Burke Estate, which was an expensive purchase for the district, would not, even at the time, so, well, maybe we'll build a school. Now thinking, what would we have done without it? It was so, and there were other buyers that were interested in buying that property. So, I don't know, I'm just saying that there's always that need to consider the infrastructure.
I don't know. No, go ahead.
Just going,
I think,
I was just thinking, what are those people working
as a newcomer with someone who's been around a lot in this field in multiple communities, I think hats off to Hastings for being willing to put the money where you need to. Because, and then I think the commitment over the next several years, what would the growth per year be? You really got to think multi-year. And I think right now it's a larger number than, 6.64, that's a large increase. We all understand that. Nobody is doubting that's a large increase, but things ebb and flow. And right now, that a significant share is investment in facilities. And I'm almost going to get personal here in terms of when you have an incredibly low mill rate, then you look at what happens to buildings. and ceilings falling in, forcing on weekends, buildings shut down mid-year. Still finding major monies to spend on certain parts, but, and then you go to mold problems in other buildings, other districts. So you've just got to worry about your facilities, and if that right now is a part of this, you know, that's critical. And hats off to Hastings for those kind of investments you're mentioning, Maureen, or districts where they have built on cheap landfill, full of contaminants, contaminated soil, not far from here. You know, so it's all those kind of decisions where you just gotta, or else then you're really in a tough spot.
No, I mean, I was thinking we're
And
so
so-
lucky here.
Well, no, well, I'm not, the no is meaning smart moves, and that means you sometimes gotta pay a little more, and it's that every year, hopefully not.
I would say some things here that I think we should keep gleaning more. Thank you for bringing some of the drivers. And I think that although one of our colleagues was mentioning 60-40, again, we have to look at it with an equitable eyes. The fact that majority vote for it doesn't mean that we just carry it through. So I'm grateful that you are bringing some drivers out there for us to keep thinking and keep working towards sustainability. That's important. Also, I know that, like you talk about the brick, now we are thinking about that. The village is planning on buying the Graham School or something. Again, I think we have to enrich our school, and money comes with it. You know, there's no two ways about it. So trying to find a way to increase our revenue base is really something that if the whole town can be thinking of doing it, because a lot of the comparable districts, be it Dobbs Ferry and all of that, they have, it's not just the residents that are driving the tax. It's not heavily on the tax. We are matching up with them, but their revenue base is totally different from ours. Ours is really heavy. And like I shared with some of you, I'm on the youth council. People in Hastings, and not just persons of color, and I want to stress that because sometimes there's that mindset. We had over 100 people, families, on the food pantry. So people are in bad shape, you know. So this is not, again, when I hear majority, it troubles me, because if it has to do with majority, slavery will still continue. I'm sorry I have to pull that card out, because it's not always sustaining majority voices that means that we are actually doing what we should be doing. I want this to be the only time I'll use that card, so to speak. But I am grateful that you have brought some drivers out. Let's think it through more and not just go majority versus minority kind of mindset. That is not helpful.
If I can add one thing that you brought up, other districts. So, and I think any resident that's concerned with the level of increase, you have to look at the big picture, which you sort of mentioned, which is what is the commercial base of this town?
Right.
Take Irvington, which is the same size district really, but they can afford a $10 million larger budget because they have a very significant, for their size, commercial base. And that's not a Board of Ed issue, but that's a village issue. And just to make mention, one of the things that's not in the enrollment projections is the potential over the next few years for several hundred units of housing, condominium housing that would be built in Hastings. So anybody who looks at that top line increase and has a concern needs to look at it as a systemic issue that's the whole town, the lack of a commercial base, the construction of condominiums. It all fits together and then trickles down to what the board or the district ends up with. So it's not just what happens here.
Thank you for that
Could I jump
insight.
in back on the specific line items that are not proposals, not recommendations? But one thing you said, Maureen, this possible savings is not calculated by giving everybody Beeline tickets because it says expand routes right next to it. This would not be eliminating all out-of-district busing and going for...
No, it would just private.
This is just...
school.
Well,
Private,
out-of-district
yeah.
is private school,
Yeah,
right?
private.
This is not, because for the line above it is eliminating all in-district busing, which
No,
is
we
our
couldn't-
330,000.
We couldn't eliminate for the special ed. or
Right,
the
but we're not eliminating all, it says even expanding routes, so that's not what you said, a savings of 500 grand.
Expanding routes means
Expanding
making
routes.
them longer.
I know, because that line item is 3 times as expensive.
Oh, yeah, no.
That
We will
line
need
item-
for our special, because the majority of that expense is for special education.
I got you.
Actually, ones,
Well-
children that we actually place for most.
I just, I know you can't propose 20 different solutions, especially when they're not even things you're recommending. But something I've spoken about before is getting out of the busing game. Getting out before it goes electrical, getting out before we have to be in it. Not eliminating our teeny little route for Hillside families. A lot of families need their kids dropped off back to them at 3:30. But I do think we could, I do think this board would be interested in seeing a real number for some other options related to private school busing. I would be interested in seeing a single bus run to Eagle Hill and Windward, and everything else being a bus ticket on the B line. I think that would be a place, I think Maureen said it, there's not a lot of places where you can save money without going against cutting staff. This is the area that, whether you call it low-hanging fruit or you think of it's a service to the community, I look at it as low-hanging budget items. One bus leaving for Eagle Hill and Windward, which I say because I ignorantly don't know all of the other special ed schools that there might be, but I do know those two. Everybody else, we give their child the cost of a bus ticket to ride the B line because Albany requires it. I think that's a fair option that we should look at because our district does not pay for busing for 5th grade and up. And a lot of this private school busing costs is a game we don't want to be in. I don't want to be in the game sending kids to Hackley, Horace Mann, Fordham Prep, Iona Prep. If we can get out of that game for that private school, I think there's reason that we should back out and just focus on in-district busing, K through 4, and our majority of our special ed students go there. We spend $1 million on out-of-district busing, which I believe is for about a little less than 80 students.
Can I
And
make
we
a point
spend
of-
$300,000 on 500 kids. It's low-hanging fruit.
But
Yep.
is it in the end, because for instance, I know a family in Hastings that sends both their kids to private school and they pay over $50,000 in taxes, right? So for me, that's actually beneficial to us because we get all their tax money and don't have to provide any school services except for the buses.
I know a family that pays $30,000 and sends no kids to school.
But
I mean, I don't get the I wasn't trying to be, that came out hard. I mean, there are a lot of families that get no benefit from their taxes because a community supports schools.
But I'm saying that the people, it would be, I think we'd have to see, you'd have to really dive into the numbers because it seems like they're not, you're paying tax money, but you're not taking from the community.
Well, I don't want to speak for the 40% or the 25% that might vote against a budget or not. But a community supports schools and we are trustees, we all happen to have kids in the school this time around. It's not always that case. We obviously represent our residents who have no kids in school. We represent our residents who are never going to have kids in the school, and we represent residents that have previously had kids. So budget increases, if we're getting away from the line items, they change your community. They create a community where people have to move after their kids graduate. So there's a lot of, I think what you were saying is, isn't there a benefit? Shouldn't every family get a little bit? I have friends my age, married couple with no kids. They don't expect to get any benefit from the schools. They understand residents support local schools. And my parents will probably disagree with me when I complain about budgets. They're more like, we support every budget. And I'm like, well, I can't even use you as an example
I
then.
get it. I mean,
you
I
know.
think it's a more complicated question. Just Maureen was just telling me the other day that older people don't have to pay all of their taxes, right, Maureen?
The
Well,
star.
well, what I was
Star.
saying, what it says there's an enhanced
Yeah.
star. Actually,
So,
my argument would be that the state
They
should
pay
maybe
a lot.
expand it a bit more, but I mean, there are things that I think when that was introduced, I think there was always a lot of support, and I think people understood why, that based on your income level as a senior citizen, you do get a break on your school taxes. We adopt it every year, I know, because I see the list of who, because I always have to confirm that they don't have, because sometimes when people are living with, you know, families like multi-generation, then of course, if they had their son and daughter, you know, they own the home, but they had like their child and their family living with them, they would not be entitled to it. So I get the list each year of who applies, and there's many,
There's a discount for, you
there's
know,
a good amount of
there's a
people who
discount for
qualify.
elderly who are not sending kids. No, I would maybe talk it differently. I love this presentation. These 4 slides hit right to the heart.
Yeah.
I think this is, that slide with the 3 categories that are 75%, it allows the community to have a discussion. My concern is that this board is not asking for what I want, and I'm not the board.
What do you want?
I am not the board. What I would hope this board would come to a consensus on is saying, this is the largest increase we've ever sent towards our residents. We send it in a binary fashion. Do you support, do you not support? So we're not the voters. We send it out to the residents, and they get to say yes or no. But we control very little when the administration is bringing us only a singular option. So we mentioned it a little bit, like, hey, Maureen, Bill, Melissa, could you go back and show us some areas?
Yeah.
But it's not coming back in an actual second and third budget proposal. And that usually comes because we gear the discussion to what are our long-term considerations versus our immediate considerations. I'm not hearing any immediate considerations. And I am not a 4-person voting member. Not even in my own household do I get that many votes. So I understand my role as just sharing my opinion. I would focus more on immediate fiscal considerations. I don't believe it's hypothetical. I believe a $3.5 million increase is a tough pill to swallow for our community. It's tough for, the way Damaris said it, for the 30% of our community that might show up to vote no. It's tough for the 40% that previously voted against a bond. And it's tough for any level of income equity that makes it a tough choice. Moving to another place is not really an option. And being in the minority is part of America. Sometimes you don't get your way. I've even seen it once or twice in a previous calendar. But
I hear
if
you.
I would say, I don't really feel comfortable where we are, looking at everything as in future budgets, we can look at it. I say this isn't hypothetical. This is the budget where I would like to see proposals, and that only happens if there's 4 or 5 people on the board who are of the opinion that this is a large budget increase. Our town is getting used to 2% increases. I love the idea of being in a community that thinks long-term and paid for a bond. I believe it's an $18 million bond over 15 years. We're going to be paying $1.5 million on that bond real quickly, and we're not paying that next year because it's only a half, we're only making like a half
I think
payment.
it's like a 1.2 after that.
It's 1.2 of principal,
Right.
and then another 200, 300 grand of interest maybe. I mean, we're not even paying the full amount yet on the bond, and a community that's confident and invests in itself is where you attract people, but
But we-
that
we-
num-
we
that number-
rolled it so that it rolled with the state aid coming back, right? So
Oh,
the
right, we
first
get a
year,
little bit,
Yes, right.
we'll get more coming back.
You want to get the state aid back, which will then kick in at like 500,000 on
Yeah.
the
Keeps it
revenue.
coming down, but we have
So
a
it should
bigger,
net out at like
we
that
have a
7
bigger
or 8.
payment though in 23, 24.
Yeah, because of the.
And then it
structure,
will
you
go
know.
flat.
Correct.
And then it goes flat because of a
But
fixed
it'll-
mortgage
but
is
From a
flat.
budgetary or tax rate standpoint, it's gonna be offset by the revenue
Well,
in the following year.
just to carry on what you're saying a little bit, in the ideal real world, the best thing that could happen realistically isn't that there would be some, magic line item that we can cross out. The best thing that could happen would be for the Hastings Riverfront to be developed in a similar fashion to the Irvington Riverfront.
Would be great.
And that would really be, I'm not saying it's easy or expedient, but that's the realistic solution to the problems that we're facing. I don't think there's any amount that we could cut that would, impact someone's decision to stay or to go or to come here. And I think that there's an ethical obligation that we have to the students that are in the system, families that have moved here, that's unavoidable, so I think that, and I agree with you, I have, we've talked about it before, I have the same concerns about the budget, but, the more you look at it, so the clarity is on the other side, and how can we as a community get to a better place fiscally as a whole village? To Maureen's point, about those good long-term decisions that were made in the 80s, let's not forget, the school system, we had, 1930s, we had over 2,000 kids. 1928, 1929, 30. In the 80s, we fell down to just under 900, if I'm not mistaken. And so that was a community who wasn't sending a lot of kids to school, but whether it's for their family ties or they've been here, they agreed to support these structural changes in the community. And thank goodness they did. It wasn't for the 800 kids, it was for their sort of their entire sense of community. So it's important to remember that
And
that's.
my understanding of the 80s was that a lot of the kids, that the school wasn't very good, and that a lot of the kids went to private school that lived here.
Well,
Really, that's why they made the benefits to the school, because they were trying to get more people to stay in district.
No, in the 80s, we sent kids to every Ivy school. I was a student in the 80s.
You were, that's what I wanted to
Exactly my
ask.
point, the schools weren't that,
They were a little more obnoxious. We were mean-spirited back then. No, I just, I appreciate that viewpoint. I think this is a year that lends itself to starting the challenging discussion about values, about priorities, and how budgets reflect what, we want to offer for Hastings. We want people to move to Hastings. Obviously, it's a very tight circle. It supports your own home if you happen to own your home. But this budget, I'm interested to see at what level it passes at, what percent at. 6.7, we're closer to 7% than we are to 6%. And some of it is not flexible, as Maureen's 101 budgets always show. I love the 3 drivers. $1 million of it's coming from salaries, $1 million of it's gonna be coming from the bond, and $1 million of it is coming because our leaderships and superintendent have identified special ed as an area that needs further support. So, Doreen, you're right. Our community already voted to support the bond. Our community already understands that salaries get a minimum of 2% raises based on their steps. And our community understands that administrators make decisions about what's needed. So I'm curious to see if a $3 million increase is going to get the significant support from the community. But I am concerned that our role is just to pass it down the road. Here you go, community, you decide, yes or no. And the other option would be to say, I want to see some actual recommendations. I would like to see a budget that comes in below the tax cap because we have so many other expenses this year. What would a budget look like if instead of $3.5 million, it came in at $2.5 million? And actually turn these items into what would you recommend as to two budgets, and I know it seems clear the administration would prefer budget proposal number one, and then the board can decide we want to send the administration's budget down the road, or we want to ask them to send to us more of budget proposal number two. We're always running up against time, so I'm sure it's not possible.
I have some thoughts.
Yeah, let me just layer into the conversation, from the standpoint of a long-term look, and this is just gonna put pressure on us to do the job well as administrators, but there are three strategic initiatives we're gonna get busy with. There's the facility capital analysis, and in that, we could be really keeping an eye on efficiencies. There's the portrait of a learner, where it'll settle. I mean, yes, it's a vision an area, but you can be saying along the way, how are we optimizing? You know, and can really get busy about what's that mix of courses and classes and opportunities, and how do you optimize that? And the other is the internal out, meaning not starting on the program review within special ed. So if you even go to those three top drivers, those strategic efforts hit each of those three. And I'm not promising a lot of efficiency there, but I could promise that and the board could hold us to it, that each step of the way in those strategic processes, we want to optimize. We need to find efficiencies. So it'd be one thing to say, we're going to look long-term. It's another thing to say, we're looking long-term and we're going to get busy about analyzing what that means, if you hear my distinction.
When you say, what does internal out mean?
Meaning the program review, I'll speak plain English, thanks for asking me to be clear, is instead of bringing an external person to the program review, we're going to start from the inside, start with the two existing studies already done, start with the existing smart people, staff, families, and all the rest. That's what I meant.
Can I have a question? Can you go back to the first slide, Maureen, that has the three buckets, the 325%?
I'm sorry, yep.
So, right there, right? So, looking at each one of those, I feel like the debt one we can't control, right? That's 870, it's 870. So salary costs, we're in we have contractual increases with our admin and our teachers that we're negotiating now. So there's a certain amount that, because of steps and other issues, has to go up. But then, you know, one of the things that we could say is no increases for anybody. No salary increase. I'm not proposing that.
Those are
But that's what-
contractual.
No,
Right, that's what I'm
about the
asking. So that's-
additional.
But it says salary costs / contractual
Well,
increases.
well,
So that was my
I mean,
question. Is the 900,000 mean, is all of it's contractual? Or is some
Including
of
the
that
steps.
900,000 an anticipation of raises based on those?
Yeah, there's some, obviously, you're in contract negotiations, but there is, a small amount of money that you set aside that would go to a potential settlement. I just want to be clear that, I mean, the other thing is, it is a negotiation, not a dictate, so you have to always look at negotiations, much people hold the line. The reality is that it is collective bargaining, and it does require both, parties to come and negotiate a contract in good faith. And quite frankly, if you were to come to impasse, I'm just saying, if we decided we're not going to pay people money, there's a likelihood that they would still get something. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not
that's
so.
what- I'm not
there is some
recommending
that's
them, right? I'm
under our
just
control,
looking-
but it's under our control up into a certain level. There may be levels where maybe
Right.
saying a full zero, I'm just saying, may or may not, or a step freeze or something. Those
Right.
are not things we can just.
No, but my point is really, I totally agree with Jeremy. I'd love to see a budget that's $1 million less, or like a 2.5,
2.5, yep.
Sure.
that goes, that would be incredible. My point is, I don't know that it's possible, So that's why I'm wondering,
Everything's
like,
possible.
Yeah.
but could we
But
pull out,
but it's
from
really
the
important
big
that-
ones, where can we
Correct,
pull out?
correct.
And from the third bullet point, the special education costs, which of the 820,000, how much of that is the new proposal
Right.
that we were given last week? So if we didn't do
special ed?
this
So
new.
There was an existing position that was there.
Okay, so there's no additional
No,
in
that's-
any of these, there's
So-
no wiggle room in any of these.
But the 820 is additional over last year.
Right, but part of that,
Most of
I thought
it was
was
driven by
because
energy
of the
costs.
presentation we had last week.
Yeah.
about
There's a lot of
that.
different pieces and parts.
Yeah,
Well-
so but if we didn't do what they want to do, what
Well-
would that go down by 500,000?
No.
These
No,
are settlements
no.
and contractual services, so.
Yeah,
I think
we're
I know what
actually
Doreen is saying.
in- Yeah, and we can talk more about special education now, or on, because I think also on the 4th, you want to come back and kind of you're getting close to your vote, but to talk more. But actually, those areas where we have flexibility, we're actually bringing costs down with the special ed. It's the areas where you really are
Right, okay.
responding to individual needs and be it the IEPs, et cetera, and we have to, and everyone resonated with that idea, we're more.
I'm not saying to do it,
I hear
I'm
you.
just
No,
asking.
right, I'm just clarifying, no. So but it's a really good clarifying question. That 23% increase, that's not part of the program review. That's not part of the assistant director. And, which we'll talk a little bit more in a couple of weeks, we are looking at some staffing modifications there that will still bring as good or better services, but with enrollment shifts and all the rest, we are seeing some efficiencies there. So,
Right.
and long-term, you would hope to have some of that, I'm looking, that third bullet, you'd say, can we begin to get a better handle on that?
Right.
But the key is you do that such that you're still very much providing the services each child needs.
I have two questions.
I still not have it.
Oh, sorry. When you are done, I'll go.
First of all, I really want to thank Maureen and Bill for putting this presentation together. I mean, I could tell when I suggested this last slide, you both got a little tense last week. And we've never shared a slide like this because it tends to create battle lines in public very quickly. And so determining these are not recommendations, because I think what I've noticed over the last 5 or 6 years was that it doesn't lend itself to the types of conversations Jeremy's suggesting. It doesn't lend itself to having outward conversations because everyone's so afraid you're going to get caught up in a battle about one of the line items. But I don't really know now, years later, how you ever, as a community, move forward without having these conversations. That said, I have an opinion that this isn't the year to do it for a few reasons. First of all, these are very sensitive topics. They take a lot of trust. And I think a lot of trust takes a lot of nuance and threading of needles and building relationships and trying to figure, you're going to piss a bunch of people off, and you have to have the trust and the currency and able to do that in a way that they say, you pissed me off, I completely disagree with you, but you've made a lot of good decisions, and I'll back it. You need a senior leader who's been here a while to do that. We've not had a senior leader who's been here a while to do that. Someone has to own these cuts. It's not the board just saying, I want to get cash out of the system. It's a system that has to be trusted with the cuts. You're never going to totally trust it. I don't feel like we're there yet. I feel like we're getting there. I think, Bill, you've been doing a great job. The team's been working together. I think that this isn't the year to do it. That's one reason. Second reason, as Bill pointed out, portrait of a learner. We're doing the North Star process so that we can start to really identify what's critically important. What you don't talk about the North Star process is something's not going to be as critically important. And you know what? The next time we're having a budget conversation, we could talk about it just didn't carry as much weight. It was really important by a few people who were really vocal in town, but we didn't hear a lot about that in the process. And it may give us as a board more confidence to make some of these tough calls, because right now I feel like we're flying in the dark a bit with making some of these calls. The other thing, there's a few things in the budget this year which are, you know, I think one thing Jeremy said, this is the highest budget we've seen, which it isn't true. I mean, we had some 8% errors back in 2000, 2002, and you know, there were some big ones. It's a high one though, I mean, which is to his point.
When I first came, budgets used to go by like 9 to 10% in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, and you know, very hot stock market, 90s, 2000, the aughts, you know, I mean, like, it was like, you know, it's just, people didn't pay attention as much. When your portfolio is going up by a ton, and the asset prices you own are just skyrocketing, it's like, yeah, okay, whatever. All of a sudden, 2009 crash happens, everyone's looking really critically at their assets, and they don't want to spend as much, right? So it's always been a little bit tougher over the last 12 years or so. But this year, we have an increase of oil costs, an increase of utility costs, we've got inflation, we've got TRS going up by, what, a couple $100,000. That might not be around. we have the first year coming on the bond. It all is this perfect storm to hit a 6.6% number. Now, to Jeremy's point, could we find a way to shave off 100 grand and 100 grand here? And that might not be his exact point, but, you know, that's a point that's tangential, if not directly at his point. And does the board want to say, hey, can you find another couple $100 grand to go back to the administration? And so that's something that the board could do. But those are the big things. We've got a perfect storm of bond, facility, inflation, energy, TRS. We've got leadership that's really got to be trusted. We're coming out of COVID. And, you know, so a question on the table. Are there ways to find a few $100 grand to cut here and there? Maybe there are. You know, are there ways to pull out $1 million? I don't see it. And my personal opinion on it would be a smart thing this year. So I just want to share those thoughts.
Okay,
Thank you, Jeff. That was really
sure,
helpful.
thank you, that was great. I have a couple of direct questions and then some suggestions which I've gleaned from what everybody said, because I was just thinking through my head. The first direct question is back to what Maureen was saying. Is this figure reflecting both the step increase and then the additional increase that we are going to give? Because I know that if we do 0%, it will still, the step increase will still be there. The 3 to 4% will still always happen yearly, correct?
Yes.
Yes, so does this value include that or no? The bullet point?
I mean, I don't want to really speak to it. I mean, we are not, you know, usually when you're in active side of negotiations, you don't want to get into too much to the weeds, but it, you know, just as a matter of, we have about $30 million worth of salaries, and each year are, even without a new contract, on average, because there's different people at different step levels, it's about 3%, 3 to 4% you're going to go up regardless of
Correct.
a COLA, you know, kind of, or something in that range, you know, it varies because it depends on the personnel, but, you know, we are in for a good, like, 700,000, 800, you know, each year regardless of what the contracts settle at.
Okay, then the second one was the special ed one. Does it include the new line or no? That was suggested.
It does, but in that, with that particular position, we're using a current position and using, and moving it, so really,
It stays the same.
it was the same.
Perfect,
I mean, I
okay.
guess theoretically, get rid of the position altogether, what would that save you? But really, we also have grant monies that we can use toward that effort, so I think for us, it really wasn't, that wasn't the driver of this
Got it.
special increase. It was, it's driven on out-of-district placements and contractual expenses.
Okay, I just wanted to ask those two direct questions, and then the follow-up suggestions that I have was just based on what Jeremy had said. So if I put 5 options that I think that it would be fair, maybe, fair is not the word, it may bring some clarity to those that want to really understand that, you know, this is something that we've tried everything we've done and this is what we have to do. So the first option was just as is, the 6.64, that is like the best way. We are trusting the leadership team to think that this is the best way, which if we had a ferry, boop, we would all agree. The second part I was thinking of is, let's see a budget that is 0%. So yes, they get their step, but let's see one with the 0% and see. And then the third one was the bus that you mentioned. Let's also see an option with the bus thing and see how much we save. And then the fourth one is, let's trust and see through conversations, through some of us understanding more of the budget, see which other areas can we keep gleaning. Again, this is an effort that we are just trying the best we can. And then the last one is, I know this is not the school, but how can we think of revenue base that could increase? Can some of these programs be more supported from outside groups or philanthropists? Or like you spoke about the village, the waterfront and all those things. So these 5 options, if we are able to see, we ourselves would say, oh man, we are taking AP out, that would be hurtful, right? So then when we vote on this, we know that we tried everything by looking at all these different options. So that's what I wanted to say.
I think that one thing not to lose sight of, if you look at our year-over-year budgets, a few years ago when we were unsure during, I guess that was we were creating the 2021 budget, that particular year, our budget growth was relatively small. I mean, I think there are years where you're going to have ups and downs. I think what we really have tried to do, and if you look at it over the last 10 years or so, really definitely since the inception of the tax cap, we really have had relatively low growth. We are experiencing, but again, not unlike other districts. So I think the one thing, and not so much as that I'm saying it to deflect to anybody, but similarly, if you look at our, neighboring towns, they are also experiencing significant budget growth this year. And many of them don't even have debt. Some of them actually just rolled bans. They could have issued the bond, but they chose not to they were trying to just kind of defer for a year, because similar to us, many of the districts locally, are seeing 5% budget growth without new debt coming on, 6%. So this is every single person I have, well, not every single, but the people that I'm in contact with and speak to, similarly, like I mentioned, I was talking to my colleague today, I have a lot more kids going out of district right now. Again, many of us are thinking some of it is related to COVID, the after effects of COVID. You're seeing inflation, you're seeing increases in utility bills, and just across the board. And when you are negotiating contracts, guess what? Inflation comes into play in those as well. So it also, as much as people may be experiencing the inflation, so the employees also have that, right, in their thinking as well. So we also have to realize that whatever we do here, it's not in isolation. And I've said this before, again, about our budget. I think, yes, we have to be worried about our budget growth. Yes, this is not to say, but I do think, as I've shared before, many districts that are the exact same size, that are not even a mile away, spend $12 million more than us a year. To think that we're on some kind of wild spending spree is not, we really, I think, for what we are able to deliver here, and that's why some of these slides, yes, and certainly we can look at some of these things and change them, but there is a certain amount of cost in this region. It's an extremely, one of the things that state aid does not address is it's extremely expensive, this area, close to New York City, and our expenses for both labor and even actually utility costs here versus even in Dutchess County are significantly different. So even things like that, we pay a premium for. So I just think we have to kind of also, as we have these discussions, not think about what does it cost in this region per student? Not to lose sight of that, because if we start getting really out of whack, in the region, then maybe we do, should also look at that. But I was even just calculating our per pupil allocation. It's almost virtually the same as our neighboring districts, you know what I mean? And actually, much of them are higher, but I'm saying if we were even using Dobbs Ferry, which again has a lower budget because they have 150 less students, but our cost per student is within $100 of each other. So sometimes that's another way to kind of measure our spending. It's how, because without it, it's sort of what is the right number? Is there a right number? If you have a higher enrollment, this idea that we're not going to spend more money is not, we have to consider all those factors too. We do have we have a nice size enrollment here, and
I think that's a nice place to jump back in, because Maureen is correct. Concern about the budget does need to be constantly stated. We don't feel that we're running a loose ship in any way, Maureen, that we are comparable at $33,000 per student to other districts, that this is not easy pickings because people weren't watching the lines, and Maureen has 20 won't say it, many years watching these lines.
Too long.
Not too long. Fabulous, 20 fabulous years. So my concern is that I believe a lot of, this board is in its first term. I believe a lot of people run for the board on sort of one priority item. And for me, my one priority item is that I believe this community, because we don't have business support, is already pushed to the limit. I believe our community's pushed to the limit. A 6.5% increase breaks the trust. Doug was talking about trust. It breaks the trust with our community that we're not going to present budgets this big. Budgets are binary. When we present them, it's a yes, no. If in the 80s there were 8% budgets, well, maybe salaries were going up by 6% back then. What I do know is this budget is 60% larger in increase than any other budget ever before. This is a $3.5 million increase. The biggest increase before this was $2.1 million. It's 65% larger than ever before. It's not because her whole department is not missing a line. It's because we were presented these numbers in January, and there was not a clear consensus saying those numbers need to be pushed back against. So that's, yeah.
I just feel like we're debating the nature of reality here, in the sense that, I feel like we're having the wrong discussion in a way. We're sort of shifting the Overton window to have as though we can have a cogent discussion. There's sort of heroic, game-changing cuts that can be made. I think that the reality is quite clear. It's a village commercial tax base issue. And, so I think that the point that, regardless of what the number is, that there's trust that might be broken or something, which I don't find credible. It's the same trust that we have, the students that we have in our care that have been here all along, and there are people that are entering the system. We have an absolute, obligation to them. I mean, I don't see it any other way than that. So, I think in the grand scheme of things, it's a village revenue issue, and,
Well, we don't control that. I mean, as trustees.
We're residents. We vote for the trustees of the town.
But we don't, there is no revenue for we can't control revenue. I was going to control expenditures, I don't want to look at the 20-year possibilities of developing, the riverfront. I've lived in this town for 40 years. It's
Right.
never getting developed. Just let you know, in 2040, we're still going to be playing around with, can we get taco prod? But I will say,
I just want a clarifying point, if I may, and you're raising all this with great respect. But I think that slide of the 75% driving factors.
yeah,
We worked exhaustively as an administrative team to bring in the smallest number possible. And I think that slide tells us what we're up against. And we value deeply special education. We worked very closely with Lauren Tesfor. That number would have been a lot larger.
It was a lot larger.
It was a lot larger.
Double that.
It was almost double that. And we worked intensively with Lauren Tesfa, and right now, SEPTA's endorsing very strongly what we're doing. And part of it is we are looking at some high-quality service with a little bit different staffing. And we do need to talk about that. And there's not going to be a child in this district not served as well next year. But I think we probably brought you a much smaller number there than we would have. And that was the administration working very, very tightly on that area. Debt we couldn't touch. The contractual, if you take the actual growth relative to the actual salary level, that's a small number. And we also, we're in negotiations, so we have to be cautious as to kind of how we handle that. The next slide, I think your busing points are very well taken, but there are larger questions and issues there. But again, I just say respectfully, please know that before this showed up, there were, in a sense, options run. And we brought you the lowest number we could get to, and none of us think this number is what we'd want to see in multiple years. If we can, handle that. I just want to clarify that point.
that's very clear.
I think the number was 800,000 higher than what you're saying. I mean, we were at over.
But we are once again spending everything we can right up until the tax cap limit. We are hitting the number. I just wanted to get back to expenditures, I believe this is the year to have a, if the board's on board, then the community votes. Can you cut $100,000 here, there? Yes, but we deserve the chance. If we ask for it, we'll get it. We're never gonna ask for it if one person asks. So what I was saying is, I know my one priority was budgeting. The people I speak to maybe know I'm financial, so they always bring me that story. And some of you ran for one main reason too, whether it was curriculum or whether it was,
Equity.
equity in the curriculum, equity in the, in our stakeholders, curriculum, right, is changing. For me, I know I'm not the board, and I'm afraid of a board that gets overly involved, except for the one thing I wanted to get overly involved in.
I like your
So the hypocrisy of me saying, don't get involved, like, don't dig into these numbers. The administration proposes a budget, but that fourth slide is things you wouldn't even recommend. It's not the same as saying, bring me a slide of things you would recommend. And I'm not an administrator, and that's not even my experiences. I think we would save $500,000 by getting rid of out-of-district busing. That would be saving the full $1 million and getting half of it back from the state. I think one bus run. I'm not proposing that. I think that number there, we could save $400,000 by bringing K through 5 classes up to 26. Now you're at $900,000. What I've spoken before, I'd like to cut all dollars spent on professional development. I know I'm not speaking to a consensus there. Our administrators and board members are supportive of a portrait of a graduate. They're supportive of bringing in consultants to do professional development. I only would suggest those cuts because we're hitting $3.5 million. We have an absurdly atypical year, and we're not making any immediate considerations. Everything is a discussion for previous calendars. We could fund settlements. Our special ed settlement reserves are way more than usual. $400,000 last year was the most I'd ever seen, $500,000 budgeted. We could say this is the year we're going to do those one-year budget tricks. We're going to fund all $500,000 of it from the reserves, the settlement reserves. There are ways to say our budget number is atypical. We've got to make atypical choices. Every year, our budget has a rollover appropriated balance of about $500,000, maybe not during the COVID years. We're increasing line items where we didn't even hit what was budgeted. If it's an atypical year, if this is a number that concerns you for the 40% of the residents who didn't say they were ready to spend and invest in us, this would be the year to ask for a page that is actual recommendations. I believe this was helpful, but nobody has ever discussed killing Hillside busing. Nobody's, really even talked about cutting sports or drama. There's a couple line items here. K through 5 ICT, very interesting. Is this the year you would be forced? Wow, our hands are tied. We're going to have small ICT class students, kindergarten through 2nd grade, but in 3rd and 4th grade, we're going to put all of those students in one class, saving 2 teachers. So maybe you don't save $900,000, but you could get another $250,000 there.
The challenge is all these go against a variety of long-term things that have been put in place. So for example, the idea of inclusive classrooms, the one you just brought up, this idea that students with special ed, with IEPs and not IEPs are learning together, is all part of a long-term strategy that's been developed. And these one-time things, in order to pull back for an individual year, starts to have this kind of knee-jerk reaction to the curricular strategy that's going on. Now, out-of-district busing, a different thing that has been brought up. We've spoken about that, quite a bit. But each one of these things, I guess maybe where we go from here is, Sound Jen is making a proposal. The proposal is to ask the administration to come back with some deeper cuts. If they were going to go for another $500,000, whatever they do, the question to the rest of the board is, does anyone on the rest of the board want to have the administration go back and do that right now, realizing it's time and energy? Because that's, I think, the question that Jeremy put on the table.
That is exactly it. If the board asks for it, it's reasonable. And if one person on his one soapbox about budgets asks for it, then Bill, Melissa, Maureen know to just nod and ignore, because one person doesn't run this board.
Yeah.
But I listed a quick $1.1 million. So I would be asking, a proposal, what would you do to bring it at 2.5? Or you could even say, what would you do to make the tax hit less? That's why I suggest fund from our settlements. We can fund from our settlements. It just kills your...
But you don't know the other things that we have that are actually accounted for in that money, so you just use money that's already being, that number would have been significantly higher based on current scheduled payments and settlements.
I hate funding from reserves because
No,
it
but
leaves a
I'm saying the
trap.
Especially in a tax cap world, where you
I
can't make it up
know,
later.
but that's the idea of starving the growth on its own. We have a reserve. I don't understand reserves well, and I've never pretended to, but we're budgeting for $500,000 because last year we paid out $400,000 in settlements. We're not ever asking for the big number. Bill and Maureen and Melissa, they worked their butts. No, they worked hard to get to $3.5 million. If this is the year that you go, wow, what we've usually done is class sizes of 22 because we know it values education. It's a very rare, would you put it out there to the community at K through 5? That's a real item there. K through 5, 26 kids before you get another class section saves $400,000.
I'm going to be on vacation the day that you make that recommendation.
I'm making it right, I'll make it right now. I believe we could, through attrition, raise class sizes at Hillside. I believe,
Well, we don't have.
So, let's make it, because that's a big can.
It would be very
I'm not opening it, I'm just saying, these are my ideas. I would approach out-of-district busing, class sizes, professional development, not the year to spend on Portrait of a Graduate or any of the consultants that come in. No, I would, this is not the budget that's gonna build,
There's not a lot of support for this, but I
Yes.
actually don't want to step over Jeremy's, Jeremy's really
Asking
fighting
for
hard
options.
to try to find a way
Options,
to
yes.
create this. He's doing a very tough thing right now, which is trying to represent a variety of people in town who have these concerns. I think everyone at this table has these concerns.
Yes.
And we're balancing a lot of different things. He's trying to find a way, in the most productive way to do it. And, my gut sense right now is that there is, from the other 6 people, I will say for myself, but it seems like other, on the board who've been elected, see that concern, see the pain, understand it, realize it's a long-term problem, and believe that because of these specific things that are going on this year with the TRS, with the add-on to the bond, I know that there's going to be a little bit more next year, but we'll start getting money back, that's going to go down, it's not going to be as much of a budget increase, it was voted on by the public, some of the inflation stuff, but there's a certain critical moment right now that it doesn't seem, I'm not going to speak for the board, I'll speak for me, but maybe this is what's on the rest of the board, that it doesn't seem like jacking up class sizes, pulling out ICT from 3rd and 4th for 1 year to try to match that, and creating the havoc in kids' lives is a valuable step to take in the hopes that next year we're going to be able to find some alleviation of these challenges when we're able to. And if we can't find it next year, and it looks like we're going to be up against some really tough challenges and problems, and we're going to have to make that, but I've been here when the budgets haven't gone up this much, and this is, there's some very specific things that are on. So I don't see this, I see this as having the potential for a long-term sustainable problem, but this one budget year not being an indication that that's necessarily a foregone conclusion.
I'll make my last comment, I'll keep it under 30 seconds. I do want to reiterate what Bill, brought the attention to. The 3 items in Maureen's presentation that are our main drivers, I support all of them, not because they're flexible or not flexible. Taylor contract increases are coming, we voted for the debt, and our administrators told us special ed's a priority. Those 3, I'm fabulously glad the board supports our administration on. I just think those 3 I'm not even thinking about. We support those. We support your priorities. If there's an urge to make difficult cuts, it comes from other areas.
I think, Bill, I felt like you were synthesizing some
Yes.
of these comments and we're going to come back with comments. Did I read you correctly?
Yeah, I think you were asking Maureen to
I
pause.
thought maybe that would sort of pull things together, but I saw a moment when you were
At this moment?
reflecting.
Well, I mean, you have an ongoing process here. We're back with you, unless you have a special meeting, we're back with you in 2 weeks on the 4th. I think there's some clarification and tightening down we want to do. I mean, this is the number, but there's some things going on in these numbers we want to make sure you're crystal clear on, because we did not walk in with the biggest number. We walked in with a tighter number.
Correct.
And everything on the slides that we had earlier is there. We just want to make sure you and the community are very, very clear. There are some staffing adjustments here tied to enrollment. And we just want to make sure. So we already have begun to look, if you will, at some of those items that are on here. And that'll enable us to get it down to the 664. So I think it's some of that clarification we want to do. And then you're still 2 weeks off your vote. And we just thought, Maureen and I thought, particularly joined by Melissa and the leadership team, clarifying some of that. I do appreciate what I hear Jeremy saying, is I've been in situations where the individual's not so respectful of being the individual, and I thank you for that. Where I've watched boards have 4 or 5 points of view, and out goes the administration, at this point, literally in a process, chasing 4 or 5 ways to get the number down, and you don't end up in a good place. So I think the synthesis would be, tonight, I think the board does need to grapple a bit with, I mean, Jeremy's laid out a charge, and he's done it respectfully. I mean, and I heard you, Doug, tacking to where is the rest of the board on that? What kind of fine tuning do you want between now and your next discussion? I don't want to put us in a corner for future years, but none of us are pleased bringing a 6.64, because we all deeply respect the taxpayers in Hastings who have built this district and built what it is. And the ebb and flow of budgets, though, as you look at that slide, what 75% of that growth is, was almost untouchable. But we even were able to, on that third item, special eds, still able to make some significant shifts, and we want to make sure everybody's clear on that. Again, I want to be super duper clear that every child within special ed next year will have the services they deserve. But I think we're finding ways to do that and find some efficiencies.
I wanted to make 2 points.
So I don't
When you are done.
to be clear, I think you heard a few minutes ago, is as we get to 2 weeks from now, is to bring back any more clarity we can. But I think you as the board still need to think a bit more of sort of, is there another charge you're giving us as administration?
Yeah. I want to just say 2 things, and the first is that I want to be clear about the suggestion that I gave about looking at the added options, and then just having that clarity, transparency, understanding deeper into the difficulty that I know the 3 of you are faced with in bringing this here. I hear, I'm hearing class size, I'm hearing all those things, and I'm thinking about individuals that will be losing jobs only because there's no more class and blah, blah, blah. That's one of the reasons when I want to make it clear, and I was actually whispering it to Alex next to me. That's why I was talking about if the step is maintained, but we don't add the 0%, back to what Maureen was asking. Like the steps, the 3 to 4% is given so that every person keeps their job instead of cutting this program, meaning that now you're making someone jobless. So that, for me, that was my thinking. I may be totally wrong. And then I shared this with 1 or 2 board members about the gleaning process. Oh, let's bring 6 things and let's look at it and everybody's talking about those 6 things, when there may be more that we are not even looking at, but then we are drilling on those 6 things. It's happening the same thing with the calendar. The things that gets thrown at us is what we focus on. So is there a way for us to glean more? Like you said, what you brought with the special ed was like the bare bone. But then we are all focusing on that because that's what we are seeing. So, I mean, I personally, that's one of the reasons why I want to see more of the budget than just stuff about it. So that, you know, if in clear conscience, if we've tried all we can and this is what it is, so be it. We can clearly communicate that there is that, like, we tried hard, but like Alex said, our revenue base is not helping us. So we have to go in this direction. That clarity, transparency is really important, because if we all understand that we've tried all we can to try to have a sustainable part, and we still have to do 6%, 7%, 8%, 10%, just name it, then people come in with that confidence. So for me, that's all I'm trying to drive here. So I will end my statement right here.
So it sounds like, Damaris, that you're saying that you're in agreement with Jeremy that admin should go back and try to give us
Correct.
a second proposal. with
Correct,
some
correct.
items.
More gleaning and
Yeah.
more ideas, correct.
You know,
Bill, does that ever happen, though? I mean, the administration brings forward
But it's up to
one
them.
proposal. Is that accurate, or do you ever bring forward alternative ideas? Because I know we're supposed to either, you know, pass it to the residents to vote or not. Have you ever seen a district where we choose which proposal to send to the community?
I mean, it's very, I mean, I can't speak.
You could say never if it's
Well,
never.
Well, no, I mean, I think, in essence, it would be saying, instead of this slide here, having it, that word not in it would be the recommendations, but knowing that that's ghastly, frankly, for the quality of the educational experience in Hastings.
But that was $2.5 million worth. That was that totaled, all of it is.
Well, any number of those. I think the challenge, Jeremy, is boards constantly are saying, okay, you brought us the big one. They're not going to say, here's option A fully presented, here's option B fully presented.
Right, you don't get two fully
No, you
presented.
get option A, here's what our best bet is
Correct.
administration.
Right.
And now we'll start shaving it away at whatever number the board
That's what I was
says it
being
wants
clear.
to
We
shave
don't
back.
get a two-option
That's
full.
the one.
And in the shaving process, you tend to get into a lot of divisive, problematic, painful talk. Because if that first option hasn't been very carefully crafted, then you don't have many places to turn.
Yep.
And so I think one thing I have suggested is, you know, whatever number we get out of here, and the administration's recommending, as difficult as it is for some, 6.64 is a good number right now, is that we get through this process, we have the village embrace it after the board embraces it, and then we say, going into next year, how do we design a budget process earlier that lets you as a board have these conversations earlier? As long as it's still preliminary, because there's still things evolving up to the point where we bring you the budget. But it may be you say in the fall, let's talk a bit more in depth. I mean, you'll be a board that's been together that much longer and better able to have those conversations. Because another way to answer your question is, I've lived this a lot. And where I've lived it in part is to say, can you get the board talking earlier about what's possible, knowing it has to be preliminary bit, right? Because, I mean, there's some things we just don't know until we bring you that recommendation. I just think we could go back and try and find more. It's just going to be, I mean, you're kind of seeing the categories here. It's either, and where you're going to get any kind of swing, you go to that second slide, and within that 25%, I mean, you're getting, you can't touch TRS.
No, you can't touch the first slide or the second slide.
You might see 150K in that professional inclusion, but I don't even know what's real there, and you give up a lot. You take away any forward momentum for understanding where you then get some strategic opportunities. Utility bills, that's out of our control. Tech expenses, that's out of our control.
No, it'd only be
$70,000.
professional learning on that second slide.
And your professional learning number is probably, the swing money there is, I think, not a lot. So
if, Doug, you were speaking to it, if there was a charge from this board, and if there's not, I'm happy to fall in line, you know. 6 out of 7 is a huge get out of the way, fall in line. And it doesn't sound like it's 6 out of 7. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But if there was a charge, I'd like there to be as much flexibility in how it's presented to the administration. I wouldn't focus on the 56 million that we're asking the town to vote on. I would put it more on the 46 million that is raised by property taxes, giving Maureen and Bill and Melissa the flexibility. What would it be if you proposed, instead of 46.4 million of property taxes, what would it be if it was 45.5 million, and what would it be if it was 46 million? A proposal that lets our administrators decide this is the year to fund it from reserves, or this is the year to make cuts. One more thing on numbers, we raised property taxes of 44.5 million last year. The charge would be, what would it be if property taxes were up by $1 million, and what if they were up by 1.5 million? And we already know what is proposed if it goes up by 2 million. That would be I think the fairest charge, and if it's not there, we don't need to have our administrators work on it. Is there an interest in actually seeing what 2 other levels of property taxes would be, either with cuts or spending reserves? And if not, we are well-positioned, we're well-led, we have great detail, the community can slowly make their comments, and then the community votes. And our community tends to pass budgets.
Respectfully, the characterization of that as the fairest charge, to me, I see these cost savings as illusory in the sense that most of it is cost shifting, right? You eliminate busing, we don't pay it, residents pay it. You increase class sizes. You add 4 kids to each class. How many more kids are going to get caught up into, needing extra support, or IEPs, or remediation of some sort? So, I think that we can have a conversation if there are sort of ethical financial decisions to be made. Those are the ones that we have an absolute obligation to make. But if all we're doing is just talking about shifting costs or putting them, where they're not going to be seen, that's not, even if it wasn't 6 people in support of that, I think we have an obligation to stand up and say, these are not sort of ethical cuts that we can make. And so even if I was the only one saying it, I would still be saying it, that I would not be able to support that.
Yeah, I feel like, Jeremy, I would love to say, oh, there's so much extra fat in this budget, so come back to me and tell me what you get rid of, because we have so many options to get rid of it. I'm afraid that we'll charge the administration and say, please come back to us with cuts, and then they'll tell us what they are, and
that's
I'll
true.
be like, I can't live with any of this.
Yeah, that's
And it'll be like, it takes so much time for them to do it.
Correct.
And I don't know
That's
that
true.
anything I don't think I could agree with any of them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've
I
lived this in
agree.
other districts, I can tell you what it will be on it, will be what you got here. I'm being polite, so don't take my big voice, I get big and my voice gets big and people take it wrong, don't take it wrong, it's all meant well. We will come back and talk about class size increases. We will come back and you got a set of those first 3 are all about class sizes. The music piece is not to pick on music, but that's a class size piece. We would add back into the list athletics more actively. Maybe JV's gone, suggested. We would go into the facility maintenance operational year by year, that's not here. We'd say, look at reductions, as I've lived this. I put together a list of 17, 20, and on that list you get custodians, you get facility maintenance, you get all of that. I don't know, does anybody have an appetite for that? Maybe you do. Do you have an appetite for the larger class sizes? Do you have an appetite for, we don't have orchestra down here, we don't have band, we don't have, I mean, it would be the kind of money you're talking about, that's what we'd be bringing back to you.
Right, and that's my point to Jeremy, is that I personally can't live with getting rid of any of those.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm saying this with complete respect, because I've also been with boards where the Jeremy voice has not been done with such respect, and I thank you for that, Jeremy.
I would
also say that just having lived with this 2 years ago when we went into the first year of austerity budgeting with COVID,
Yeah.
we did do the unpopular things. We did eliminate FLES at Hillside. We did get rid of a science position. We did, propose trying to get rid of a music position. And the pushback that we received on the throes of having had to implement that because we didn't know what kind of, barrel we were staring down was so furious, for lack of a better word, that those were just a couple of limited instances of what families, students felt the very real impact of. And having had to live with the impact of that for just 1 year, they were incredibly unpopular. So if we're talking about like these very deep cuts, of the extent that you were portraying, I mean, I don't know if there are other alternatives. Certainly if there are, I would be happy to see them. I'm open to that. But I'm just saying, when reality actually hits the road of like, guess what, we might not have this teacher that everybody thinks is terrific, or we might not be able to offer like AP or science, or we may not be able to have these classes which, maybe don't have as many subscribers to them.
Correct.
It has a very real impact.
Correct.
And I mean, I would think that if anybody could give us some insight on that, it's the students who are here. I mean, because they actually live it, but also because those kids have reached out to us in our previous iterations when we've been on the board. So I don't think that it's as easy as just saying, I'm not here to say that I have, proposals to how to do this the right way. I'm just saying the reality of the situation is that when you actually try to cut back because it seems easy to just 1 year you're gonna do it, it's not that easy.
Correct.
It is quite impactful. It is quite disruptive. And if you're going to tell me that people are going to tolerate having 26 students in their elementary school classes, I don't see it happening. I'm not even saying that I'm not supportive of it. I'm from California. That's like half a classroom size there. Yeah. I'm just saying that in this community,
Correct.
as long as I have been here, and that's been 15 years now, we've always said we prioritize the smaller classrooms
Quality.
because of the benefits that accumulates to our student population. So I don't see that the same people who are, kicking and screaming about having 18 kids in their, kindergarten classroom are now gonna be able to tolerate an 8th-grade upswing. I mean, an 8th-student upswing. I mean, that's just my perspective from the quiet observer, but.
Yeah, I would say that I think that this engagement is healthy because
Yes.
the community is seeing how we are trying to do something about it. It's not a way, I mean, the board meetings are there for us to work. That is what these meetings are. So I think all this engagement, I think is healthy. And if we try the best that we can, and I've looked at this again, and of course, this is not even the place that we can touch, like you said, is the bare bone. So maybe the 25% part, and even that is still very, I'm going to borrow Doug's word, muddy. So I'm just wondering, like, at this point, I just feel like this engagement is healthy, because it allows the community, the students, everybody to know that this is something that we are trying to support our community equitably, and those that can support other groups that support the work through here. You mentioned Project Lead the Way is doing so many things through the students to the school, like all these things. So it's hard, and there's no real answer to it. So I guess, Bill, you have to get back to it.
Well, I think the other thing to think about is,
And the revenue.
the other thing, I have been with organizations where the board has said, go out and bring us back to 0%. It rocked the organization. And the board didn't go anywhere near the 0%. But in the meantime, you had a lot of very upset people.
Yep.
And then, so the question is, and that's where I keep saying, think multi-year, think long-term, and knowing that we as administration think that 6.64 is too high. Again, it would have been much higher if we hadn't done some other pieces here, which we want to make sure the board is very clear on. And we want the community to know that, and within to know that clearly, so that, because this discussion, I think, is healthy too. It lets us as administration be very clear with all staff to say, if the board votes for this and can have the village support this, we need to embrace this all the way across, because there are some modifications within this budget. And there's a lot that we aren't doing that people hope for, but still to be an excellent, excellent district. So my advice, if I were to give you advice, is I would get your minds around, if you could, how do you help this number be the number this year, and hold us accountable as administration and say, start early with you going into the future to say, how do we keep this number as tight as possible, and if it has to be this big again, fair warning so we can figure out how to get it lower. But if we had to go back inside right now and say, you know, coming out of COVID, coming out of the emotions and feelings that are there, you would rock this organization if you were to go in and say, bring us back these other cuts.
I mean, even the fact we were showing this tonight, required us to speak to many people, calm them down, and share with the presentation internally, and people were very upset, because I think, as I looked at it, I was just going back, over the last 3 years, I mean, if this makes anybody feel any better, the average, in 2021, we were like 0.6%, like less than 1%, we increased our budget. Last year, we were 2.25%. This year, so the 3-year average, we're really still running at a 3%. I think where the years where we've had to cut back, I think the years, especially in COVID, where we really did scale some positions back, and it has been difficult because we have really very little wiggle room now, because we did reduce even some of the moral language at the middle school to high school level, that they're still feeling. We did restore the science position last year, as you know. And this budget, although some of these are net numbers, we are down 2 sections, just to be clear, that are increasing our class sizes. One at the 5th grade that currently is 6 sections in the 4th grade. When they come down to the Farragut next year, they're going to be in 5 sections. So that class size is going to be 25 across the board, where right now it's like 22. And we are, I think it's either the second, there's one of the other grade levels that we're also reducing a section at Hillside. We're also reducing some of our special, just some of the offerings. So even within these numbers, we are actually taking reductions. And actually our 8th grade, which was, I mean, to the credit of the people internally, like Jeanette was working closely with Jennifer and Lou and Melissa, because when you have anything above the 5th grade, when things departmentalize, it requires more than almost 1 FTE per section, because you have specials and the schedule. So at the middle school, though the overall enrollment wasn't going up significantly, they are experiencing the incoming 8th grade, the 6th through 7th and 8th grade, those sections are up, as a number. And because of that, I'm sure the class sizes, quite frankly, are high at the middle school. And right in their in their budget proposal, they were looking for an increase in staffing across the board in 8th grade. Because without that, they are gonna have high class sizes in the 8th grade next year. They are, and we were like, no, we can't. We gotta shift stuff around, we're not running this. So there was a lot of internal workings that don't necessarily show up into the slide deck, that are we shifted from here to here to here to backfill for that. Because actually, with the enrollment, typically we should have been increasing staffing at the 8th grade, and we didn't.
Right.
So in addition to cutting class sizes, we were up 5 FTEs, without those reductions that we took. They wanted to run 6 sections of 5th grade. We had to speak to, the 5th grade teachers. I don't think, there's a concern there beyond it, right? I mean, just being honest about what our budget actually reflects. So there were other things. I think, as we know, beyond the debt, there is a large increase in special ed that we're experiencing in the last few years. Again, not unlike other districts, somewhat tied, I believe, to COVID. We have a high number of students going out of district, both parentally placed and children we're placing. We have more kids with ADs, with behavioral issues. These are things that I believe, I don't know, maybe but I think that's, those are things that right now we're experiencing. Are we going to decimate everywhere else because of that, or are we going to try to see ways? I think that's the question. I think, Jeremy, if there is some tolerance for the board, could we potentially look at moving more money out of reserves for next year to soften the tax impact? Yes, we do have that. I don't think it would reduce the whole levy, but if there was a sense, we could look at that as maybe a recommendation. We've been very careful the last few years in managing the amount we use, right? Could there be next year with, I'm just saying, a higher, that would be the only one thing I think that could be potentially something we could bring back. We could bring back other things, but there may be some value in saying, should we, bring in just do we want to make the tax rate increase closer to 3% to levy? Being very mindful with some of the larger increases we're experiencing this year. So I think those type of strategies I do believe that the reserves are there for they are established for rainy days and required purposes. We did increase our recommendation for use next year. Could we possibly, kick that up a bit, to kind of help maybe reduce some of the tax burden? That would probably be better than like necessarily making expenditure cuts that we don't want to make for 1 year. I mean, I would be more in favor personally of using a little bit of reserves to help ease that a bit. But anyway, but as Bill said, I know it doesn't maybe see it with the 5.5, but we are experiencing some enrollment growth in different areas and technically the budget could have even been higher.
So I'm going to try to summarize here in a second, but I just want to make sure that, and that may be a good way to go, the reserves. And one of my concerns with doing that is always that we start using reserve for operating expenses that we then have to pay in the next year in a budget that we pass, which we're now up against the tax cap again.
Yeah.
So would you be concerned about that? I mean, I guess you don't have to answer that now, but in looking at that, just, it'd
I
be.
think a modest amount more we could handle, because we do have then the following year, we should be, getting an uptick in that state aid number, you know what I mean? So I think you could maybe help use it as a way to say we're purposefully putting something in to offset some of the settlement costs that we hope are not going to be recurring expenses, and maybe use a little bit toward offsetting the first payment of debt. I think it has to be tied to something.
If you could tie it to non-recurring, non-operational stuff as a rationale, I think that's an interesting proposal for us to look at. So I know it's late. Let me just try to summarize where we are. I think this has been a good conversation. I want to thank, Maureen and Bill, and sounds like a lot more other people that you spoke to along the way. I'm sure Melissa was involved, and a variety of administrators as well, and being able to just even present these 4 slides, which was difficult. And I think, I will say, I think this is one of the tightest slide decks we've presented since I've been on the board to just have a discussion
That's what
about.
we're going to do from now on forward.
To have a discussion about, and for good reason, because we know how hard it is to present this. It takes a lot of prep to even get this in the room. I think Jeremy's provided actually a very important voice, and as Bill said, doing it respectfully is not something that a lot of people in his position on other boards have done, and so I think what he's done is forced a level of dialogue and reflection and conversation that we might not have otherwise had, which is critical. It doesn't sound to me like there's much support to send the administration back to look at cuts, and I think we've heard a strong dialogue from the administration that there has already been a lot of scalpel on this budget. Unfortunately, it's still at 6.64% even after that scalpel. So it doesn't sound like there's much to do there. Obviously, if you find 50 grand, 100 grand somewhere, we'd love to see it, but that's a different conversation. And then, but then let's look at on the revenue side of things, and let's look at how we're raising that revenue. And if you go back and could look at some ways to bring the levy down a bit, use some reserves in order to maybe hit some non-recurring costs, that could be very valuable. Let's plan to take a look at that next time. Is that a good summary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think just to be clear, Doug, I just want the community to be clear, I don't know if anybody's watching, but at least I think I can speak for the 3 of us. You guys haven't spoken much, I want to speak for you, to say that we don't think that this is a good amount. 6.64 is not a good amount, but we can't figure out how to get lower. But there's not a thought that 6.64 is like, okay, it's fine, let's just move forward. It's not okay, but we can't get it down. Right?
Yeah, figuring it,
Okay.
exactly, well stated,
Okay.
yep, thank you.
So I want to just pause now and thank you guys for staying.
Thank you, guys.
Hopefully you got like a degree of some fiscal awareness that you didn't have before. And maybe it seeped in directly, indirectly, a little bit. You'll be coming back to years later, you're like, where did I learn that? Yes, it was that meeting.
Well,
Thanks, guys.
truth be told, we took a 20-page deck to Sabine and Gus, and they said, no, here's your 5
This is
minutes.
We've done the
Remain quiet, no pride of authorship, and we appreciate that.
Thank you, guys.
Well
Thank you.
done.
Thank you.
Great week.
Thank you for your
Have a
time,
good
guys.
night.
Okay, so I think we can move on now.
I think we should hear from the public.
We've got piped in.
Business items.
Business items, I even lost the. There we go.
8.
Okay,
B.
yes, 8B, business items. Anybody have any questions on items 1 through 23 of business items?
23.
We have the modification, item number 7, we're gonna table. If I'm, the merger of all modified sports, that we're tabling, we need to take that back. Section 1's not voted on it yet, so we don't know even if they would allow it, and we need to do a little more work. There were some good questions from board members on that you'd received from the community. So if you would just take number 7 out. I'm getting that right, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, the other mergers are fine, but that's the one with Hudson Lab.
Right, Hudson.
Any questions on 1 through 6 or 8 through 23? Do I have a motion to approve items 1 through 8 and 10 through, 9 through 23? Yes.
I vote so moved.
So moved.
Second?
Okay.
All in favor?
And Melissa D., if you can help us make sure we keep track of number 7.
Number 7, yeah.
Oh, I'm setting up a conversation on that with Maureen and Drew, but I need a reminder. Thanks.
Put into the next budget as a draft budget, in the next agenda item.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, we're on to 8B, placement for CSE and CPSE for services. Do I have a motion to approve these placements?
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
All in favor? Okay. Minutes 9A, approval of minutes from 3/7. Do I have a motion to, anybody have any questions or comments about these minutes?
No.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from 3/7?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, appointments, A through D. Does anybody have any questions, comments?
What is a student observer, appointed student observer?
So often when a student is going to become an educator, their university requires observation hours, and we require notification from the university or the college just to explain why. And then we want to make sure that we go through a process to make sure that person's appropriately fingerprinted and that everything's official and you're all in the know.
Okay, thank you.
Do I have a motion to approve personnel items 10A through D?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, policy second read. Anybody have any further comments? With these, I'm assuming, are the same red line versions from last time? Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments before we vote on these? Do I have a motion to approve the policies under 11A, 1 through 3, which is, let me just read them out, policy 101, policy 1230, policy 1232. A motion to approve these? A second?
Second.
All in favor? Second public comment, no public comment, board comments.
I have one comment. Do you want to go? Just about, I don't know, Bill, if this is something that I'm making a comment, I don't know how this would be addressed or who this would go to, but, when I went to the concert the other night, the 5th and 6th grade concert, which was incredible, and you really see the difference in the 6th grade band and orchestra from the 5th grade. That you can tell that the 5th graders are just starting out, and by the time they get to 6th grade, and then if anybody's been to the 7th or 8th grade ones, it's incredible how they advance.
How much they change.
And so, parallel to that, I just want to make a comment about the modified sports, and that we have tryouts for 7th graders for modified sports. And a lot of times these kids have never played before, and yet they're required to try out. I don't know, they get to practice for a week or so, and then they have to try out, and then they get cut. And they might never go back and do it again. And if we did that for something like band or orchestra, imagine like a kid picking up the trumpet and having to practice it and compete against everybody, be like, okay, you're not gonna play, because they're terrible. Everybody's terrible at everything they start, most people, unless you're like a super athlete or super musician. And so I find that with the modified sports, I understand that, you know, some sports are more important than others, but, or, excuse me, more popular than others. But I would just like to put it out there that I think that it's somewhat unfair to these younger kids, and I also think it might be good, as you get into the high school, the kids who do the sports drop out because they have other things going on. They pick up new interests, and then you don't have this pipeline of kids in the sports. So my opinion is that, you know, I just thought of it as a parallel to the music program, that I don't think it's fair to cut the 7th graders from the sports, and I'd love it if we could do something to remedy that.
You know, we didn't talk about anything, but actually, that was my comment as well, just because, same thing, yeah. No, well, because I saw the letter talk about merging modified sports, which has nothing to do with us per se. It's, you know, inviting Hastings Lab in to participate. But a dynamic I think the Board of Ed and the district should pay attention to is the fact that, depending upon the sport, we've had an inordinate number of cuts, especially in modified, amounting to 30, 40, 50% of the kids that showed up. And even with those large cuts, we've had teams where you've had sort of a double-sized team. So the athletes play half a game or whatever it may be. And I agree with you that that's, you know, even if you take a step back, the kids that show up in the informational meeting and the coach says, we have 15 slots, and the kid looks around the room and there are 45 kids there, even though they're not even going to show up for the tryouts. And so I do think, you know, everything's a choice, but when I look at Schedule B and what an extra coach costs, and the bang for the buck in the sense of how many, you know, students that one choice impacts, I agree with you. It's something, it's an area of concern that are we really, you know, on paper we're providing the opportunity, but are we really providing the opportunity? So, you know, it's always something I think we should keep our eye on.
At 4:50 today, Drew Wendell wrote me the following. We've been getting large, I'm going to read it because it's just, it now makes sense what he sent me. We've been getting large interest, and I know this because all of you have seen me watching modified sports, so you know what I'm about to read, I have visualized. We've been getting large interest numbers and we can't safely accept them all. It becomes a dangerous situation with one coach in small space. Volleyball and basketball, for instance, we only have one gym, possibly two now that we have Farragut back. Softball and baseball share Zinsser Park, and girls modified lacrosse will be sharing Reynolds Field with the modified boys lacrosse field. In the past, we didn't make cuts. I had 45 players on the modified boys basketball team. Even if we hired another coach, which we also did, the practices are hard to stagger with space and nearly impossible to safely organize. Do we have the funds to add more teams and more coaches? So I put that in the context of our previous discussion, that this is an example where we've not put more money in to keep the number down, knowing full well this stress point. So you've got an advocate in Drew, and so your point very well taken. Okay. And I think it's some, and I'm not viewed, some would say, oh, you just read me a resistance note. No, I'm not reading a resistance note, it's sort of an evidence information note of what we're trying to grapple with. And I think it's something we should be thinking about. How do we create, because it's a great example of parallel over, how do you keep that same opportunity for young developing children, right? And so it's point very well taken, and we're thinking hard on it. And I share that example from Drew to say he's right there.
I'm very glad to hear that.
We don't have the solution yet, but one reason to pull back on the Hudson Lab was, one, we got to see what Section 1 says, then analyze the numbers. Drew was thinking there might be more revenue coming with that somehow, which we're not sure that's quite fully thought through yet. So again, we wanted to think on it because at the core of it is exactly what your two concerns are.
If I could just add one extra layer, because
is that fair? What I've just
oh, absolutely,
again,
absolutely.
Don't hear is more your ADs agreeing with.
No, I absolutely do. But also something I don't think we talk enough about is, you know, you've mentioned, you know, in terms of budget optimization. Like when we're talking about something to cut, or, you know, a couple grand here, a couple grand there, it never really rates, but it does rate depending upon how that money can be repurposed. So if it's, like a coach, which is via the schedule is several $1,000s. That's, in the scale of what we can accomplish with that money, it's a useful shift. Or even the event that you mentioned with Rachel Weinberg, that playwright thing, such a unique experience. I wouldn't even put a dollar value on it, but it probably wasn't much. But that's, it's a real bargain, right? To be able to make that happen. So when we're talking about budgets, not just in terms of dollar value, but how much value we can get out of it, those are the opportunities that, for me as a board member, I find particularly attractive.
Yeah, that's hopeful.
I'm just going to jump in quickly. I also support that idea. I think MOD is super important and for all kinds of reasons. I even like the idea of it going on in 6th grade or, it's a time for kids to be trying things out and seeing where their skills are and developing them if they've never had a chance before. So I'm definitely in favor of that kind of spending. I also wanted to just note that Mrs. Denton is retiring on our agenda, and she's been here for such a long time, such a lovely person, and such a well-respected teacher who has just helped so many kids over the years, and they remember her and think of her fondly, and that's a loss for us. I hope she's going on to something that she's going to love to do, but I wanted to be sure we recognized her many years here.
Thank you.
And then one more thought, and I'm just putting this out there for, this isn't maybe the right solution for it, but sometimes I find it hard jumping into our conversations. We're very fast in jumping in. So it's, I wonder if we might want to consider as a group occasionally just going around. If you've spoken once, wait and till everybody else is at least, but you can say pass if you don't have something to say at that moment. But in order to help people who are not good interrupters, participate more easily.
Board process.
Just a thought.
Absolutely.
That sounds great.
That sounds great. I agree 100%.
Interrupting is very easy for me.
I always do it at the wrong time, and then they've already started talking, and it's just not good.
No, I appreciate that.
No, I like the Supreme Court model that they did during Zoom, and it could even start by seniority. But I would like to speak to the 4 new board members, myself and the 3. I continue to find these meetings fabulously easy to listen to and jump in and talk. And I think it's partly the leadership of our 3 administrators here, and maybe some of the credit goes to the 6 people sitting around me. But again, these meetings are helpful, transparent, and I appreciate the group that's at this table.
Likewise, thank you.
100% yes.
May I ask the board one question?
Yes.
This is written by Gus's late grandpa,
Oh, no way.
and I was gonna read it after his remarks. I know I'm in the public right now, but if you don't mind, I will surprise him after the next, because the theme of this book is collegiality with difference.
Oh my God, amazing.
Yeah, that's his
Bring it on.
grandfather.
What
Yeah.
decade
Going
did he
north.
write? When did he write it,
Boxes.
though? What decade was it written?
Decade.
1980?
It's okay.
If you're okay with it,
We're in a
next
totally
time-
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
place.
Maybe just
So
20
we go to
pages,
March-
20 pages a meeting.
Before we
Yeah.
pack up with the motion to adjourn the meeting,
So moved.
second,
Second?
yeah, all in favor?
Thank you.
That's
Sorry.
really